tell, do you see the road? I'm out to my soul into the size. Whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect, you do it. All of that green together, the truth, yeah. When I tell you the
Hello and welcome back to Cypherfics, guys. We are happy to have you back with us today in part 7 of What If Harry Potter Meets the Power Rangers. Make sure to like, share, subscribe and also press the bell icon so that you never miss a great update. Also make sure to check out the wonderful author 10star12 on FANFICTIONnet. Well, let's continue with the story now.
Harry, come up here for a moment. Forcing down a groan, Harry moved once more to the front of the group of students to stand before their teacher. This was only his 4th karate class since Hedwig's return, and in that week and a bit he had been called up 3 times to demonstrate whatever they had been working on, only to be corrected on some perceived flaw by the Red Ranger before the class was dismissed. Normally Harry would be alright with this. Jason was the teacher and voice of experience after all, and at first he was, but after the 2nd class in a row Harry was admonished to watch his footwork after having spent the previous day's practice with the other Rangers ironing out just that he was starting to get frustrated. He wasn't the only one either. A few of the other students had started to shoot both Harry and Jason slightly uneasy looks. One of his classmates who had been in Jason's class for months had even told him that he couldn't see anything wrong with his form at all. This led to an awkward sort of commiseration, as he seemed convinced that Jason was just putting a little extra pressure on the new guy, as it were. He had assured Harry that Jason would lay off eventually, at the very least whenever they got another new student into the class. For his part, Harry wasn't really so sure anymore. Internally bracing himself, Harry bowed to Jason before following his instructions to run through the day's kata by himself while Jason called out the moves, slowly walking around him as he did. Ready 1. Punch 2. Block 3. Punch 4. Back 5. Ki. By now, Harry had run through this kata enough he could probably do it without thinking about it. His grid enhances learning curve had already placed him as one of the early standouts in his class, as he was able to take the various movements from new and uncertain to pure muscle memory with comparatively little practice. This ability, combined with the instruction from the other Rangers, had made most of Jason's nitpicking rather questionable, yet still it continued. All the same, perhaps he was being too HRD on the Red Ranger. Alright Harry, I see you've done some practicing. Your footwork was much better this time, but pay a bit more attention to your blocks and tighten up your ready stance a bit. Class dismissed. Then again, maybe he was just bringing his grudge over to a new field now that he had an acknowledged position of authority over the wizard. Bowing, Harry made his way to the locker room, filing his musings away again as he showered and changed before taking his place behind the juice bar counter. For the next 30 minutes or so, Harry went about his job, taking and filling orders for the various patrons of the youth center juice bar and pondering over the situation with Jason at the same time. His musings were interrupted, however, by Zach as he approached the counter with an easy gait, but an uneasy look in his eyes. Harry studied the Black Ranger as he ordered smoothies for himself and the other Rangers, sans Tommy, who had taken spots at a nearby table. Zach really did look more than a bit off, though Harry couldn't exactly place why. Finally, after sliding a tray with the Rangers' drinks to him across the counter, Harry decided to simply ask, "What's bugging you, Zach?" The Ranger shuddered theatrically. "Don't say that word, man. Ugh, I can't stand bugs." Harry raised an eyebrow quizzically and held the look until Zach started speaking again. "Let's just say I had a close encounter of the creepy crawly kind earlier today and I can't shake the feeling off." "Ah," Harry nodded sympathetically, briefly thinking of Ron's arachnophobia. "I didn't know you were afraid of bugs, Zach." He nodded dramatically before groaning slightly. "Yeah, bugs and snakes aren't really my thing." He shot a quick look to either side before leaning in closer and speaking in a whisper. "Some of Rita's monsters have been a pretty close thing for me, let me tell you." Harry chuckled a bit. "Based on the stories I've heard about some of the ones I missed, I can only imagine." Zach gave him a half-hearted glare before perking up slightly. "So, Harry, I noticed you're still having some trouble with Jason's class." It was Harry's turn to groan now. "And there's a topic I really don't want to think about. It seems like no matter what I do, I'm always doing something wrong." Zach looked slightly uncomfortable for a moment, and Harry realized that he was essentially complaining to him about one of his best friends. Before he could comment on it though, Zach seemed to have an idea. "Well hey, maybe karate just isn't your thing? How about you come with me later when I go to the park to meet some prospective students for my martial arts class?" Harry was rather surprised by this. "You're going to be teaching a class too?" It wasn't that Harry doubted Zach's ability, far from it, as Zach was easily one of the best fighters amongst the Rangers after Jason and, more recently, Tommy. Harry had always just seen Zach as being a bit more easygoing than what a teacher typically was in his experience. The Black Ranger, luckily enough, was apparently unaffected by Harry's show of doubt. "Yeah man, I'm going to start teaching some of my hip-hop keto and I'm meeting a bunch of kids in the park to give a demo. You should come along. Maybe it will be more your style." Harry raised an eyebrow. That had sounded scarily like Zach wanted to teach Harry how to dance and fight at the same time like he tended to do. Harry had only really danced once in his life and that was during the Yule Ball in his 4th year. He somehow doubted that it would have any relation to what Zach intended to teach. However, just as Harry was about to decline, he noticed a bit of movement out of the corner of his eye and glanced over to see Ernie standing conspicuously close. When he noticed Harry's gaze upon him, Ernie gave him a meaningful look and nodded toward Zach. Harry groaned internally. It seemed as if Ernie had heard Zach's offer and was once more going to force Harry to go hang out with others and have a social life if he didn't take the leap himself. Turning his attention back to Zach, Harry noticed a glimmer in the Ranger's eyes that told him he noticed the byplay from the slightly pushy but still overly friendly owner/operator of the youth center. "All right, Zach," Harry sighed, idly rubbing at his eyes in irritation before fixing his glasses while Zach chuckled. "I'll come along to your demo. I don't know that it will work out for me, but it could be interesting to see anyway. Are any of the others coming along?" Smiling now, Zach shook his head. "Nah, man. They have something else to take care of. So I'll come get you when I'm ready to leave, yeah?" Harry felt a smile stretch across his own face as Zach's infectious good humor caught hold. "Sure, I get the feeling that Ernie will let me go as soon as you're ready." Ernie just snorted and moved further from the two, apparently satisfied that Harry would be hanging out with his friends later. Smiling still, Zach took the tray of drinks back to his table and passed them out to the other Rangers. Harry watched for a moment, nodding when Kimberly and Trini, the only two facing him, looked up and waved as Zach took his seat also facing toward the counter. Jason and Billy pivoted slightly and waved as well before they all got back into their conversation and Harry went back to work, taking another order and getting started on it. He continued in the monotony for another 20 minutes or so until Trini walked up to him as he was wiping down a section of the countertop. "Hey, Harry," she said, somewhat hesitantly as he stopped his cleaning and smiled at her. "Hey, Trini. What's up?" When she didn't immediately respond, actually didn't even meet his eyes right away, Harry shot a quick glance over to the Rangers' table. Jason and Billy were still facing away, though they seemed focused on Kimberly who was talking to them with an eager smile on her face. Zach looked slightly unhappy though, perhaps even a tiny bit guilty if he was reading the look on his face right. Before he could ponder it anymore, Trini finally spoke. "So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind helping me out a bit later on. You see, we're studying entomology in my science class and I had to bring in a bunch of insects for the class to study. It was kind of an extra credit thing anyway. While I was researching for it, I learned about a statue in the park, the forest spirit statue. According to the legend behind it, the statue provides protection against bad insects, and the city council wants to tear it down and put in a barbecue pit." At this point, it was rather obvious even to Harry that Trini was rambling a bit, but he couldn't bring himself to interrupt her, so he just smiled as she continued talking. "So anyway, I used the bugs that I had collected in a display at school to help tell people what was going on so they would sign a petition to protect the statue, but Bulk and Skull came along and let them all out. My teacher, Mr. Bartz, gave me a chance to collect some more and still get the credit, and I was hoping you might be able to come along to help, please." All at once a few things became obvious to Harry. First, Zach's unease and his recent bug-based encounter. If Trini had been running something like that at school, it was an easy guess that the other Rangers were nearby. And knowing Bulk and Skull, they probably made sure to release the bugs on or around others as a matter of general principle. Second, the activity that the other Rangers were doing that prevented them from watching Zach's demo. They had probably already volunteered to help out Trini. And third, the reason for Zach's slightly unhappy look, though the reason for the guilt escaped him. Harry gave Trini an apologetic half-smile at the hopeful look in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Trini, but I already agreed to go with Zach to his martial arts demo he's doing later. He seems to think that I might find myself having less trouble with his dancing style than with Jason's karate." Trini's face fell rather dramatically before she took a deep breath and rallied herself, giving him a rather forced smile. "Oh, okay, it's all right. Billy, Jason, and Kim are coming along too, so we should be okay to find enough." When she continued standing there awkwardly, Harry couldn't help but speak again. "Hey, how about after Zach's demo is over I'll contact you and see if you still need any help. I should be able to round up a few more bugs for you with a quick spell or two. Would that work?" Trini's eyes brightened a bit and her smile became slightly more natural. "Sure. Thanks, Harry." Harry nodded and tapped his communicator. "I'll talk to you later then, yeah?" "Definitely." And with that she walked back over to the table with the others, perhaps not with a spring in her step, but at least not sad anymore. Harry watched her go for a moment, noting idly that the first thing Zack did when she sat down next to him was put a hand on her arm and apologize, if his lip reading was any good anyway. He spent a few moments pondering the action before any further thought on it was pushed aside when more customers came up to the counter and he was forced to get back to work. Harry spent the next half hour or so working until the Rangers all stood from their table and started making their way out around 5:30, waving to him as they went. Seeing this, Ernie all but chased Harry out from behind the counter, barely giving him time to wash his hands and remove his apron before he left. Leaving the youth center himself, Harry was more than a bit shocked to find Zack behind the wheel of an older car, black of course, with the other Rangers nowhere in sight. After climbing into what was apparently Zack's car, he didn't even know Zack had a car. Harry was told that the others had set out in the Rad Bug and were heading for the opposite side of the park from where he and Zack were going. That side of the park bordered on some untended fields and Billy was confident they would be able to locate Trini's replacement insects there fairly easily. For his part, Zack expressed his general relief to not be going on the bug hunt with the others before he started expressing the virtues of hip-hop keto. It was apparently a fighting style he had invented himself, based heavily off of his own karate expertise alongside his dancing skills. It was something that the Ranger was eminently proud of, and he was both incredibly jazzed and very nervous at the possibility of having students of his own in his own style of martial arts. The drive to the park took around 10 minutes and they were unable to find a nearby parking spot, so it was nearly 6 o'clock by the time Zack and Harry arrived to meet with the assembled children with their parents standing nearby. Zack wasted no time at all gathering everyone around and thanking them for coming before jumping right into his demo. As Zack began to move, Harry noticed a few moves he had seen Zack use in both spars with Jason and against the putties they tended to fight regularly. With his limited expertise, Harry judged that the style was very heavily based on dancing, but Zack tended to lash out suddenly with various quick strikes and spinning kicks before moving right back into a dance move. It came across as very unpredictable and seemed to have a lot of jumps and flips, though Harry was more than a bit convinced that Zack was just showing off now to try and generate some interest in the watching kids. When he finished with a bow, everyone seemed excited, and Zack was immediately surrounded by several children of various ages, though none of them were older than Zack himself, all of whom were raving about how cool the style was. Harry just shook his head, chuckling to himself as the Black Ranger soaked it up, running over the basic rules of martial arts being for self-defense and such, interjecting a bit of reality into the awe the children seemed to hold him in at the moment. If the kids registered it, they didn't seem to show it. "Excuse me," Harry turned to face a woman who had to be one of the parents who were watching their children. "Are you teaching the class too?" Harry flinched in surprise at her question before smiling. "Oh, no ma'am. I'm just a friend of Zack's. He asked me to come along to see if I wanted to learn too, but I don't think that it's really my style." The woman smiled back at him as she turned to look back toward where Zack was now showing the kids a few simple moves. Apparently the demo was turning into an impromptu lesson of sorts. "I see. It's just, I've never heard of anything like this before. My son has wanted to learn some kind of martial arts and I was about to enroll him in one of the karate classes at the youth center when we heard about this, and he seems so excited now. Has this young man taught anyone before?" Harry shook his head as he responded. "Not that I know of." Then, realizing what he had just said, he quickly backpedaled. "But Zack has been practicing martial arts for years and is a very skilled fighter. He created hip-hop keto himself from the ground up and tested it against Jason Scott, the teacher of the youth center karate classes. I've spent enough time around him to know that he'll be a great teacher." The woman seemed satisfied with his answer and thanked him before moving back toward a cluster of other parents nearby. When they all started talking, Harry was more than glad he had corrected himself during their conversation. He just hoped that it was enough to prevent him from having sabotaged Zack's chance at getting some of these kids as students. "Harry," Zack called, snapping him out of his thoughts as he jogged up. "Hey, let's run back to my car real quick. I forgot the music cassette and the kids want to try out a few more moves, so we need some tunes." Harry blinked in confusion, glancing over at the kids to see one trying to imitate some of Zack's moves badly in front of the rest only for them to copy him shortly after. "All right?" Zack smiled before setting off at a steady jog, his infectious energy causing Harry to start off after him. Even still, Zack's head start and better conditioning meant he reached the car first and was digging through a few things in the trunk when Harry arrived, breathing a bit heavily. "Aha!" Zack shouted suddenly, standing upright with a cassette tape held in his hand. "I've got it. Can't believe I forgot it, man." Zack laughed as he closed the trunk and turned to face Harry. "So what did you think?" I saw you were talking to one of the moms. What did she have to say? Do you think you'd like to give it a try? Even while Zach was speaking, he was already quick walking back toward the kids. It almost looked like he was forcing himself not to start running in his eagerness. Harry rolled his eyes as he started after him. Hey, slow down a second, Zach. I'm not in bad shape, but I still can't take all this running back and forth without a bit of a break. Zach froze for a second before offering an apology through his easygoing laughter. Sorry, man. I'm just so pumped. The kids really seemed into it. This is exciting. Harry smiled as he patted Zach's shoulder. Wait, you're excited? I really couldn't tell. Harry just rolled his eyes again when Zach laughed. Seriously though, you're doing great. The kids really seemed into it, and I'm sure most of them will be singing your praises for some time to come. The parent I was talking to expressed some concern that you might not be an experienced teacher, but I did what I could to calm her fears. And no, I really don't think hip-hop keto is for me, Zach. I'm having enough trouble with regular karate. I feel like a more energetic fighting style would just set me back even further than I already am. And besides, the only other time I've ever really danced, it was an unmitigated disaster. Zach shot Harry a mysterious smile and shook his head. You know, that may have to change at some point, but anyway, I kinda thought that might be the case. I just figured I'd offer anyway. Since it seems you're having a bit of trouble in Jason's class and all that. When Zach trailed off, they both settled into a bit of an uneasy silence. Harry didn't say anything further because he was once more pondering over his difficulties in Jason's class. The more he thought about it, the more he was sure that Jason was just picking on him because he could. He was snapped out of his thoughts when they rounded a bend and came within sight of Zach's potential students. Zach was the first to react. What the heck? The two rangers exchanged a glance as they looked upon the scene before running up to the group of children and parents who were all lying on the ground. Hey, come on you guys, Zach said uneasily, kneeling down and shaking some of the kids while Harry checked on a few of the parents. Hey, come on. This isn't nap time, wake up. Glancing around briefly, Harry checked for any observers before pulling his coin from his back pocket and shifting it into his wand. With a quick swish and a mumbled incantation, he performed a diagnostic charm on the prone people. When he got the results, he frowned. They're all asleep. Yeah, and they aren't waking up, Zach mumbled. Oh man, what's going on here? I don't know, but it's a fair bet that Rita has something to do with it, Harry scowled, standing once more as he looked around. No kidding, Zach trailed off before activating his communicator. Zordon, this is Zach, come in. Yes, Zachary, Zordon's voice came through clearly. Harry and I have a big problem down here at the park. All these kids and their parents are asleep and we can't wake them. It seems that Rita has unleashed a horde of moths that shed sleeping powder as they fly. You both must leave the area. You are surely the next targets. Zach and Harry exchanged another look before Harry once more resumed his lookout, this time directing his gaze a bit higher as he watched for any flying insects. Zach turned back to his communicator. But we can't leave them here, Zordon. Do not worry, Zachary. I will watch over them as best I can from here. If something goes wrong, I will take the necessary steps. Zach shot Harry another uneasy look before nodding needlessly. All right, Zordon. If you say so, Zach trailed off for a moment before letting out a short cry of shock. Over there. Harry quickly spun in the direction Zach was pointing and immediately caught sight of a cloud of dozens of moths with pure white wings flying steadily toward them. As they flew, they were leaving behind a trail of white powder that dusted the ground behind them, most likely the sleeping powder that Zordon warned them of. Zach ran up to Harry's side and began pulling him away from them. Come on, Harry, if they catch us it's gonna be Rip Van Winkle time. Confused momentarily by the reference, Harry nodded and started running after the Black Ranger. Right, but where are we gonna go? Zach just kept running for several seconds with the wizard right behind him. As they ran, Harry noticed two things: one, that the moths were keeping pace with them easily, and two, there were a few more people lying around them asleep. Harry wouldn't have been surprised if the moths had circled the park to knock out everyone before coming after the two of them, but what was Rita's plot here? Hey! Zach suddenly shouted, slowing down to grab Harry's arm as they ran. I have an idea. What about the forest spirit statue? Trini was saying earlier that it's supposed to protect people from bad bugs, right? Well, these bugs are about as bad as it gets. Let's go. Harry was a bit skeptical that an old statue and a legend would prove to protect them from Rita's attack, but the Black Ranger was already well ahead of him, running much faster than before now that he had a clear goal in mind. His fear of insects was probably driving him more than a bit if Harry was any judge. Panting a bit as he ran, Harry picked up his pace as best he could, idly glancing back to see the moths were still pacing him, almost as if they were hurting them. By the time they reached the statue, Harry was breathing quite heavily. He almost didn't register Zach's words when he spoke again. Oh man. This can't be right. The statue is covered with these things. Harry forced himself into a standing position, holding his wand tightly in hand as he looked at the statue himself. It was a statue of a woman wearing robes of some kind and was sculpted in mid-leap. Many of the finer details had been eroded after so long being outdoors, but it was still a rather nice piece of art, aside from the fact that it was indeed covered in moths. Then Harry noticed a small part of the statue to seem to flake away before it suddenly started moving and became another white moth. And that's not all, Zach. Harry grabbed his arm and pointed out another moth forming from the statue. These things are coming from it. I'm getting the feeling that Rita did something to the statue. Zach pointed up at the statue's head. Yeah, you're right. Those snakes in its hair are supposed to be flowers. I saw it on a picture of the statue at Trini's display this morning. Frowning, Harry waved his wand and sent a diagnostic spell at the statue, only for it to hit a shield of some kind and fizzle out. Yeah, that's definitely not right. Harry mumbled. I bet Rita sent it. Zach near shouted, anger overtaking his former fear as he glared at the bugs. You think we should morph? Harry looked back, seeing the moths were spreading out to surround them now. Probably wouldn't hurt. Zach, seeing the moths behind them as well, nodded firmly. All right then, it's morphin' time. Mastodon. Magi Ranger, power up. When Harry was once more able to move out of his morphing pose, he saw Zach had already manifested his power axe. All right, Zach said, gripping a part of his axe below the blade and sliding it down the handle until it clicked into place at the butt of the. I'm gonna see what this is all about. Gripping the axe near the blade end, Zach held it at his hip with the bottom of the handle pointing toward the statue. Before Harry could ask what he was doing, the weapon let out a blast of energy from the bottom end that flew forward and blasted the statue, blowing it to pieces and engulfing them in a cloud of dust. Bloody hell, Harry mumbled, staring at Zach blankly. I don't think I've ever seen your axe do that outside of the power blaster. Zach chuckled, patting his weapon affectionately as he switched it back to its axe configuration. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. When the dust cleared, Zach and Harry both recoiled at the sight of a large spider-like monster. Aw man, I knew it. Zach groaned as the monster hopped down from the remains of the pedestal the statue had been on. It had a rather large round body, much larger than the statue it came from strangely enough, and stood on its back most legs while waving the other three sets around threateningly while staring at the two rangers through its many eyes. It had to be a spider, Zach continued as the monster just stood there making growling noises. I hate spiders. A roar of fury from the right caught Harry's attention and he turned in time to see Golder landing nearby, brandishing his sword. And a Golder. Harry quipped. I hate Goldars. So, we meet again, Maggling. Golder growled, stepping up next to the spider monster. I hope you don't expect your fancy suit to make any difference in our battle. Harry sighed and summoned the Magi staff with a gesture. Golder, you weren't able to beat me before I became a full-fledged ranger and there's no way you can do it now. Before Harry could charge to meet the golden-plated monkey, Zach grabbed his arm. Hey, Harry, he said uneasily, eyeing the monsters before them. I don't suppose you could let me take on Golder, could you? Harry rolled his eyes behind his helmet. All right, but don't take too long. And I hope Zordon is calling in the cavalry already. With a nod, Zach dismissed his axe, the weapon merely glowing briefly before it vanished, and pulled out his blade blaster and converting it to blade form. With a cry, the two rangers charged the two, swapping positions mid-charge to line them up with their chosen opponents. Golder braced himself with his weapon held in front of him and met Zach's faster charge with a block before pushing him backward. Harry led with a spell. Arania Exumai. Harry cast the spell with his own magic, not wanting to take the time just now to fuel it with grid power, but it still had the pleasant effect of knocking the spider back several yards and onto its round back. The sheer size of its torso let it easily roll back to its feet, but by the time it did, Harry was right on top of it and made a quick pair of strikes with the Magi staff, guided by the grid, and once more knocked it off its feet in a shower of sparks. The monster merely continued growling as it rolled back to its feet. You know, Harry mused aloud as he took a stance. I already like you more than Rita's other monsters. For one, you don't talk much. With an inarticulate roar, the spider's top two arms jerked towards him, emitting a continuous stream of white webbing that stuck fast to his suit and glued his arms to his sides. Well, that's not good. Harry was almost immediately knocked off his feet as the spider charged him, using its bulk to bowl him over easily, making him drop his staff as he fell. Harry! Zach shouted as he caught sight of the Magi Ranger's predicament. Hang on, Harry. I'll AH. Zack was cut off as Golder knocked him to the ground with a single swipe of his sword. "So little, Magi Ranger," Golder said Harry's new title mockingly as he approached. "You haven't even been a ranger for a month yet and already you have fallen to my Empress's might." Harry grimaced. "I wouldn't count me out just yet, Golder. You know how well that's worked out for you in the past." Golder stroked his chin in thought for a moment before nodding. "You make a good point, Magling. Perhaps I should just kill you now then." Harry paused for a moment. "You know what, on second thought, count away. You won't find me complaining." Golder laughed sadistically as he stood over the trapped wizard, holding his sword overhead. "Farewell, Magling." Golder's apparent triumph was cut off by an avian screech as Hedwig came at him in a stoop, the force of her blow making Golder stumble to the side and leaving Harry an opening to roll the opposite way. "Thanks for the save, Hedwig," Harry panted as he struggled to his feet, his arms still stuck to his sides. "I don't suppose you have an idea to get me free, do you?" "I do not believe so, Harry/Wizard, but the yellow-plated monkey is coming back already." Harry looked up just in time to see Golder was indeed charging him again with the spider monster right behind him. Just before Harry was once more struck down, the charging monsters were hit by multiple bursts of color and sent to the ground in a shower of sparks. Harry turned to see Zack back on his feet again with the other 4 core rangers all running over, each of them brandishing their blade blasters. "Good timing again," Harry nodded to them as Zack made his way over and helped pull one of Harry's arms free. Once he had that mobility, he was able to summon his staff back to his hand and vanish the rest of the webbing from himself just as the monsters regained their feet. Golder growled seeing the new arrivals. "You may have beaten me, Rangers, but I don't think you will have the same luck with the spider." Golder vanished in a flash of light just as Harry felt a familiar pulse of magical energy from above. He glanced up to see a speck of red light that he realized was Rita's staff coming down to grow the spider. Harry's mind started racing. If the staff managed to touch down, Rita's spell would grow the spider monster. But they were in the middle of Angel Grove Park and there were a number of unconscious civilians around here from the moth sleeping powder. With the way the giant monster/robot battles moved around, there was a better than even chance that the immobilized people could end up squished. Harry's eyes narrowed under his helmet. Not on his watch. With determination, Harry stepped free of the cluster of rangers and spun his staff once, gathering just enough power for the most basic of kinetic magic spells, the Force Wave. The spell did exactly what it sounded like, merely created a directed wave of force that emanated from the caster and spread out until it ran out of power. In this case, Harry sent it flying on an intercept course with Rita's staff. The visible wave of kinetic power hit the falling staff and flashed brightly as the two magical energies conflicted. Unfortunately for Rita, with her staff so far from her palace there was nothing she could do to prevent Harry's spell from throwing off her own, and her staff flipped wildly through the air, finally landing on its side between the rangers and the spider monster that was now growling in a somehow confused-sounding manner as Rita's spell fizzled out. "Whoa," Billy said with a small amount of awe. "Good idea, Harry." "Yeah, now we need to capitalize on it," Jason shouted, but Harry was already moving, sprinting as fast as he could toward the staff. It was his hope that he could recover it, and the Elder Wand by consequence before Rita could do anything to stop him. This was, after all, the first time he had it without Golder, a bunch of putties, or Rita herself nearby, and with the other rangers in the area, they should be able to hold off the one monster that was there, right? Just as he dove to grab the scepter, it flashed bright red and vanished before his fingers could close around it. Rita's cackling voice immediately started echoing from above as thunder boomed across the sky. "A very valiant effort, Magling, but you'll have to do better than that." Harry climbed quickly back to his feet, dusting himself off idly as he went, and glared at the spider monster that was still standing in front of him. He had just lost a very good chance at recovering the Elder Wand and he felt his irritation growing because of it. With this surge of emotions, came a surge of power and he felt the grid take over once more. "Let me show you what you are now capable of with a little help from your owl friend, Harry." Harry took a wide stance, spreading his feet around shoulder-width apart as he began spinning his staff around himself, passing it from one hand to the other as he brought it behind his back and back around. This time, instead of internalizing the gathered power for a spell, Harry felt the power gathering at the tip of the Magi staff as it had did when he used his incomplete finisher under the grid's guidance before. After a few moments of charging, Harry shifted his stance, thrusting the weapon into the air just as Hedwig flew down, flaring her wings to land on this newly presented perch with her talons fitting easily over the top bar jutting out from the top of the staff. "This should be interesting, Harry/Wizard. Let us destroy this spider thing." With Hedwig now perched on the top of the staff, Harry began moving again. This time though, he brought the staff back down to his side with his arm drawn back to move it forward. As he did, Hedwig began taking in the gathered power, glowing with a bright purple aura that was especially bright around the resurrection stone at the top of her head. With a final smirk at the now doomed monster, Harry moved his staff forward in a lunge. "Take this." Hedwig shot off the staff like a rocket, the boosters coming from her sides leaving a bright trail behind her as she covered the admittedly short distance between Harry and the spider in less than a second before tearing through the monster with a bright flash of light and beating her wings to gain altitude to bleed off the excess speed and power with a screech of victory. Harry stood from his extended crouch slowly as the spider began to teeter back and forth, purple electricity sparking from the hole in its center every few seconds. Still moving slowly, almost dramatically, Harry turned away from the monster to face the other rangers who stood watching, rather dumbfounded. With a swift jerk of his arm, Harry swung the Magi staff out to his right side, the last of the built-up power vanishing in a burst at the same instant that Hedwig landed on his left shoulder and the spider finally fell to the ground and exploded, making his vest/cloak flutter in the resulting shockwave. When he once more felt in control of himself, Harry sighed. "All right, I'll admit that I felt cool doing that, but that still doesn't mean I like all the random hand-waving I have to do all the time." Once they had demorphed and Zordon confirmed that the sleeping powder moths were gone with the destruction of the spider monster, Zach rushed back to his students, leaving Harry standing awkwardly with Trini, Jason, Billy, and Kimberly. So, Harry started after Zach had left, Hedwig in her organic-looking form perched on his shoulder and preening his hair. "How'd the bug hunt go?" Trini groaned. "We had all that we needed, but we had to leave them behind when we morphed to come help you and Zach. We'll have to go back and get them. I hope none of the bugs got out." Jason winced slightly before looking toward the clearly setting sun. "I can't, Trini. It's getting late and I need to get going. My parents weren't expecting me to be out too much later than I already have been. Yeah, and I need to get started on my homework." Kimberly sighed, looking less than thrilled with the idea. "I may not be bringing in bugs, but Mr. Bart still gave the rest of us some bug work to do before class tomorrow." Trini turned to Billy, but he too shook his head. "I have a few experiments going in my garage that I need to get back to check on." Looking dejected, but slightly hopeful, Trini turned to Harry. The wizard smiled. "Well, I did promise that I'd help you out after Zach's demo, didn't I? Since he seems to have left me here." Harry walked up to Trini and held out his arm as Hedwig took wing. "May I escort you, milady?" Laughing lightly and with a blush on her face, Trini took Harry's arm and straightened her back. "Of course, good sir. I would be most appreciative." Harry did his best to tone out Kimberly's stifled giggles as he and Trini made their way away from the Rangers and across the park under the setting sun with Hedwig flying circles overhead. Things were coming to a head. It had started the day after the spider monster attacked. Because it had been so late and so many of the Rangers had non-Ranger things to do, Zordon hadn't called them to the command center for their debriefing until the next day after school let out. It was there that Jason started in on Harry about his attempt to regain the Elder Wand during the battle. It really made no sense in the grand scheme of things, but the Red Ranger was angry that Harry had moved to try and regain his stolen property when the opportunity presented itself. Apparently he wasn't supposed to break ranks like he had, and destroying the monster solo had somehow irked Jason even further. Although Zordon had largely defused Jason's minor tantrum, the attitude persisted for the next few weeks. Rita was still not attacking with her former frequency, so Harry's schedule was largely filled with training karate, studying grid magic, working at the youth center, and occasionally being pushed into hanging out with his friends by Ernie. In his karate class, Jason continued to call Harry out on seemingly minor things, sometimes when there were other students who were having more trouble than Harry himself. When Rita next attacked, it was a rather personal assault on Kimberly. Kimberly had won some kind of contest at Angel Grove High School and was selected to design her own float for the Flower Power Piece Parade. She and Tommy were preparing a model float that was to be submitted to a design team to be recreated at full size when a group of putties attacked them and destroyed the model. Kimberly had been rather upset as she explained that there wouldn't be any way to fix it before the deadline that evening. Billy had even asked Harry if he could just fix it with magic, but while the foam pieces of the model could be repaired, the real flowers that she had used on the model and that the putties had shredded were organic and so couldn't simply be made whole again with magic. When Rita had later sent down a monster called the Spit Flower that devoured flowers of all kinds and turned them into a bizarre kind of biting blossom that drained the vitality and energy from whatever they latched onto, Kimberly only became more affronted. With all the flowers in Angel Grove for the parade, there was plenty around for the monster to snack on, and so the core Rangers charged forth, only to almost immediately fall prey to the energy-draining flowers the monster sent at them. Meanwhile, Tommy and Harry had taken the remains of Kimberly's float back to Tommy's garage. The Green Ranger had a notion that if Harry could use his magic to transfigure replicas of the flowers, that it would work just as well as real ones for the purposes of the model float. So it was that with a few flicks of his golden wand, Harry fixed the foam body of the model and started creating the flowers that Tommy needed based on the pictures and plans Kimberly had assembled in the days prior. When they had gotten an urgent call from Zordon a mere 30 minutes into their work, the two had morphed and rushed to aid the other Rangers with the now giant Spitflower monster. The battle was a bit tense, but with the help of the Dragonzord and Hedwig, the Rangers were able to defeat the monster before it could spread its leeching blossoms all over Angel Grove. And the look of shock and happiness on Kimberly's face the following Saturday when her float was featured on the live news coverage of the Flower Power Peace Parade was quite the sight to see. Another 2 weeks without an attack from Rita found Harry and the Rangers preparing for a Halloween party at the youth center. By this time, Harry was starting to get fed up with the general attitude displayed by Jason pretty much any time they weren't morphed and in battle. If he wasn't all but picking on Harry in karate class, Jason was making vaguely rude comments during general conversation, which only made the other Rangers feel awkward and uneasy when he did so. When you added that to his general unease on October 31st, you had a rather disgruntled Magi Ranger. Even so, Harry did his best to shake off his disquiet and even planned to join the others at Ernie's Halloween party that evening. He showed up in a set of conjured purple robes covered in bright silver stars with a matching pointed wizard's hat. He transfigured himself a long gray beard and wig and a pair of half-moon spectacles. Everyone was rather impressed with his costume, though the Rangers were a bit skeptical when he told them he was dressed as a tribute to his old headmaster. He may have had some issues with how Dumbledore handled things during the war against Voldemort, but he still held a great deal of respect for him. The Rangers, particularly Kimberly, just couldn't wrap their heads around the old wizard's fashion sense. Despite their lack of enthusiasm for his costume, or at least the reasons behind his choosing of it, Harry had a rather good time even though he spent most of the night serving drinks from the juice bar. He was able to watch as Zack, dressed up as King Tut, was shut down yet again by Angela when he asked her to dance. He watched Jason and Billy, dressed as Robin Hood and Sherlock Holmes respectively, laugh at the Black Ranger while Kimberly the Princess and Trini/Pocahontas were pulled out to dance by a few of their classmates from school. He saw Tommy come in at first, but he had vanished rather quickly. Apparently his costume wasn't quite ready yet, despite the fact that the party was already going. During the party, a person in a Frankenstein costume had arrived and started causing some trouble. Though minor at first and easily mistaken for the person acting out the part of their character, things eventually got bad when they all out assaulted and chased Bulk and Skull out of the youth center. Things quieted down after a bit until Billy returned, apparently having snuck out after the Frankenstein, and reported that it was one of Rita's monsters. Following a call from Zordon, they learned that Rita was collecting some super putty, which would apparently allow her to create stronger putty patrollers, and that the monster was a distraction. It was apparently a distraction that they couldn't ignore because the next thing Harry knew, they were morphed and facing off against the monster. The Frankenstein was a surprisingly effective fighter, all considered. Even though Harry and the core Rangers charged it again and again, it continued to knock them all back with apparent ease. The biggest change came when an earthquake split one of the street in Angel Grove proper down the middle, wide enough to allow Rita to come floating out atop a giant ball of red clay, mocking and taunting all she saw as she went. When the sorceress got high enough, she threw down her staff to grow the Frankenstein, idly countering Harry's attempt to force-wave her staff aside while laughing mockingly, before floating off once more and returning to her palace on the moon. With the Frankenstein now giant, the Zords were called and the monster was eventually defeated after Tommy finally arrived. Apparently he had been ambushed outside the youth center by a bunch of putties, which prevented his speedy arrival. Though Harry found it hard to believe, the Halloween party and costume contest continued on after the battle like nothing had happened. Apparently, things like that had been happening so often that the citizens of Angel Grove were able to brush it off like nothing. Harry just figured that it came from living there for so long, but he wasn't entirely sure. A mere 3 days later, Tommy nearly stuck his foot in things. He and Jason were at the youth center practicing for a Team Ninja competition, a martial arts competition where two fighters fought in a series of rounds with another team of two. Their opponents were to be a pair of professional ninjas apparently managed/hired by Bulk and Skull, though how that came to be nobody could really explain. The only problem was that the two Rangers were having a very hard time coordinating with each other. They were both trying to take the lead on things and show off at the same time and were throwing the other off when they did. Things didn't get much better when Tommy practically called Jason out on how he had been treating Harry during a verbal bout of disagreement and accusation. Harry himself only caught the tail end of the conversation as he was working at the time, but it was the first time he had gotten any kind of solid confirmation that there was something off with Jason's actions during the karate classes beyond his own instincts. The confrontation had caused Jason to storm out of the youth center, ending their practice session early, and brought Tommy over to the juice bar to chat with Harry and explain what had happened. It really all came down to a similar issue to Harry's own with Jason. Both Jason and Tommy were leader-type personalities and they were clashing because of it. The only difference was that Tommy was a bit more of a subdued individual, much like Harry had been before his ordeal during the war, and so would be more likely to back down or compromise in the long run. Jason had been the leader of his group for so long, even before they became the Power Rangers, that he tended to react poorly to any perceived threat to his position. Tommy's laid-back attitude would allow him to settle into a more non-threatening role if he let it, and it was this knowledge that led Harry to encourage Tommy to try and go a bit easier on the Red Ranger, though he did thank him for the support. Later that same day, Rita sent down her new Super Putties, a much more durable and dangerous version of the shock troopers she had been using so far. The biggest difference in these putties was that, other than being tougher, they could shape-shift their hands into either a large round weight or a blade-like form at will. This additional versatility, along with the ability to reform any time they were destroyed by the Rangers' conventional tactics, made the battle long and daunting. Finally, after Harry, Zach, Trini, Billy, and Kimberly fought for nearly an hour to try and keep the Super Putties from destroying parts of the city, largely only by getting their own butts kicked, Jason and Tommy returned from a special mission from Zordon. They brought with them new weapons for the core Rangers in the form of a type of blaster that could destroy the Super Putties, a new Zord ally in the form of a robotic brontosaurus named Titanus, and a new camaraderie between the two as they had mended their differences through their trials and learned to work together. They went on to win the Team Ninja competition, which, ironically enough, had been delayed by Rita's attack just long enough for the two to arrive and compete. The day ended with Jason pointedly ignoring Harry, apparently having taken the stance of saying nothing if he couldn't say anything good. Harry had a feeling that Tommy had gotten the Red Ranger to lay off him a bit, and it was confirmed the next day as Jason barely acknowledged him during his next karate class. Harry thanked Tommy in private, to which the Green Ranger had explained that what Jason was doing wasn't right, or even professional, as Jason was supposed to be an instructor, and Tommy had pointed that out to him. Harry just hoped that it would last. The following Saturday, Kimberly received another low blow from Rita as the witch stole and enchanted Kimberly's grandmother's spinning wheel that the teen had borrowed for use in her school's production of Rumpelstiltskin. The spinning wheel, now the Wheel of Destruction, was an apparently sentient, flying spiked wheel that could destroy nearly anything it touched. The wheel itself wasn't too difficult to deal with, all said and done, as Harry was able to magically freeze it in place long enough for Hedwig to rip into it in her giant Zord form. The biggest problem came in the form of Golder and Scorpina, who were grown and causing a great deal of difficulty for the Megazord with their double-team tactics until Hedwig destroyed the wheel and helped to drive them off once Tommy and the Dragonzord arrived as well. Luckily enough, when the Wheel of Destruction was destroyed, the spinning wheel magically reappeared back in the school where Rita had stolen it from, so the others were able to continue with their production of the play the next night. Harry was invited to attend and did so, though he was one of the only ones who didn't laugh when Bulk's portrayal of the titular character somehow left him with his pants ripped wide open, causing the entire play to descend into farce. Harry was honestly starting to feel bad for the bully with all of the random unfortunate accidents that happened to him all the time. Still, not everything had been bad/weird in the last month or so. Zach had stepped up his friendliness since the day of his hip-hop keto demo and had actually invited Harry over to hang out a few times. Though their first time involved Zach playing a Monty Python movie and spending the rest of the day quoting it to Harry in a very bad British accent. Harry appreciated the good old British humor. Zach's interpretation of it, not so much. Tommy was also spending a bit more time talking to Harry while he was working. This picked up a bit more after the Green Ranger told off Jason during the whole Super Putty fiasco, but his presence and helpful advice while Harry was practicing his karate was still noted fairly regularly. But more than either of those two, Trini had been hanging around more often than before. In fact, Harry had noticed that she was coming by to see him for a little while at least once a day during his shift and tended to stand nearby him as often as she could when the Rangers were all hanging out together. He wasn't complaining in the least, though he was more than a bit confused by the secretive smiles Zach and Kimberly were giving him when they thought he wasn't looking. And that brought him to today. Saturday, November 13th, Harry was sitting at his desk in his room in the command center, poking and prodding at a gold galleon in front of him with his wand while mumbling to himself. Just a tiny pulse of magic to destabilize this rune now, direct the overload like so and siphon off the excess and move it over here to shut down this bit. What he was doing was the result of several hours of experimentation over the last few weeks. He had come to the conclusion that while working for Ernie wasn't a bad gig, he still needed to think about his future. He couldn't exactly be a Power Ranger forever, right? And even if he could, he would still need a way to pay the bills, and the meager wages Ernie paid him wouldn't be able to do that, so his best current resort was his stash of galleons. It took him many hours, many headaches, and more than a few melted or otherwise ruined bits of gold before he hit upon a process to successfully remove the goblin enchantments forged into the coins. Even then, it was only possible because of the different type of power he could wield thanks to the Grid and Zordon's teaching. As it turned out, Grid power was rather good at overloading and destabilizing goblin runes and protections, though figuring out the proper way to do so without completely destroying the coin in the process had still taken time to figure out. He had lost a few dozen galleons that way, though considering he had many thousands stashed away in his moleskin bag that had come with him through the veil, he felt it was an acceptable sacrifice. Alright, now I just do this and then like so, and silencing charm, and Harry closed his eyes tightly before bringing his left forearm up to block the direct line of sight between his eyes and the coin just before it let out a blindingly bright flash of light. The first time he had successfully disenchanted a galleon, he had been blinded by the flash as well as deafened by an ear-piercing shriek that the enchantments caused just before breaking, most likely a last-ditch defense by the goblins to potentially alert them of someone tampering with their coins. Or maybe they were just vindictive. Either explanation worked for Harry at this point. The flash of light was bright enough to give him spots in his vision even through his closed eyes, and if he only brought up his arm, he got spots in his peripherals for hours as well. The silencing charm was something he figured out after the first coin, especially after Alpha came rushing into his room wielding what looked like a futuristic egg beater and waving it around while demanding to know what was wrong, not that Harry could hear him through the ringing in his ears. With a sigh and a slight smile of accomplishment, Harry scooped up what was now nothing more than a strange-looking solid gold coin and placed it onto a stack of two others to the side. Those 3 coins were the result of nearly 4 hours of work and, according to Alpha, were worth a bit over $1,000. The process of disenchanting them worked very well, but it wasn't really a fast one, though it only took him a bit over an hour now compared to nearly 3 for his first few. His acclimacy allowed him to recall all the necessary steps perfectly, but it was still up to him to actually perform them with any kind of speed or efficiency. Grunting slightly as he stretched, Harry idly reached into the moleskin bag on the desk before him and pulled out another coin. Shaking his arms a bit to try and loosen them up, Harry hunched over the coin on the desk before stopping and shooting a glance at his communicator watch. The morning karate class should be over by now. Harry let his thoughts drift slightly. It hadn't even been a week after Tommy confronted Jason before the Red Ranger started in on him again. By this point, Harry had only just started to relax again, so even the slightest hint of Jason's former antagonistic treatment meant Harry needed a break. So after Jason called Harry up for pointless repetitions of the basic kata that Harry could probably do in his sleep by now, followed by Jason nitpicking over some detail or another that irritated Harry and confused the other students who by now were starting to become concerned as well, Harry made the decision to give his Saturday class a miss. This was how he found himself spending his morning in the command center disenchanting galleons instead of at the youth center already. But the karate class was over now, and that meant it was almost time for his shift at the juice bar. With another sigh, Harry rose from his chair, idly returning his wand to coin form and slipping it into his pocket, and stretched once more as he made his way out into the command center proper. "Harry," Zordon commented almost immediately. "How did your work on the galleons go this morning?" "Pretty good, Zordon," Harry responded. "I managed to get another 3 done." "That brings your total up to 16 coins now, correct?" Alpha queried. "That means the total monetary value of the gold is over $5,000. "Yes it does," Harry smiled, nodding to the excitable robot. "Not bad for a few weeks' work, eh?" Zordon chuckled slightly. "Indeed, Harry. You have done well to get so much done in so little time and against almost entirely unfamiliar magics too." Harry blushed slightly before nodding again. "Yeah, well," he trailed off, unable to find any further words while Zordon continued chuckling good-naturedly. He was broken out of his slightly uncomfortable silence when Hedwig landed on his shoulder and butted her head against his own. "Harry/Wizard, you are leaving again." Harry quickly shook himself out of his mental freeze before responding. "Yes, Hedwig. I was planning on heading back into Angel Grove. I need a break from the galleons for a bit and it's almost time for my shift at the youth center anyway." Hedwig bobbed her head once before turning and preening at his hair for a moment while she thought. Finally, she spoke again. "Then you will take me with you. I will not be left behind in this skywall room again." Harry flinched slightly. He knew that tone. Hedwig had gotten it from listening to Hermione so much and only used it when she was dead set in getting what she wanted. Hedwig, he started slowly. I can't just dash. Hedwig's fierce yellow eyes pierced into his own sharply as she leaned down to allow the eye contact. Even the slightly glossed one seemed to cut straight into his mind. Harry/Wizard, I came here to protect you. To protect my human. I cannot do that if you leave me in the Skywall room all the time. You get into so much trouble that I need to be around all the time. Hedwig, I dash. This time Hedwig just clacked her beak sharply, cutting him off mid-sentence. When he opened his mouth again to speak, she let out a sharp screech until he closed his mouth again. Finally, Zordon started laughing once more. I suppose Alpha and I shall have to arrange for you to have the proper papers and licenses to own and train a bird of prey then, Harry? Knowing when to admit defeat, Harry sighed. Yes, Zordon, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Giving out a soft purr of contentment, Hedwig went back to preening his hair. Once Zordon assured Harry that the proper documentation would be acquired, read forged, and backed up with a hacked paper trail, and gotten to him as soon as possible, Harry teleported away from the command center in a pillar of purple light. Hedwig wasn't too fond of operating and Harry didn't want to risk setting her off just now. It was a rather interesting experience traveling to the youth center with a snowy owl on your shoulder. Harry had teleported to a secluded alleyway nearby, one that he had previously charmed with a runically powered Notice Me Not ward that would give him and the other rangers a place to teleport to and from to avoid detection so long as the runes were recharged once a week or so. Upon leaving the alley with Hedwig riding his shoulder and preening his hair, Harry found himself the immediate center of attention. It shouldn't have been entirely unexpected, but Harry was still caught off guard since the only real time he had spent with Hedwig in the open in the past had been in the wizarding world, wherein such things were rather commonplace. For her part, Hedwig was happy as could be. She just sat there pleasantly, running her beak through his hair and occasionally turning to watch some of the pedestrians passing them on the sidewalk. You know, Hedwig, Harry mumbled as he watched yet another person stop walking and follow him with their eyes as he and Hedwig traveled toward the youth center. He was starting to regret not picking an alleyway closer to the place for his teleportation point. Perhaps you should have taken off and flown yourself to the youth center instead of riding my shoulder. Hedwig gave a mental scoff. Nonsense, Harry/Wizard. I already told you that I cannot protect you if I do not stay with you, and there is no reason for me to fly overhead if I can just ride your shoulder. Why do I get the feeling that you're punishing me for leaving you in the command center so much? Hedwig leaned down to meet his eyes again, drawing a gasp from a nearby watcher who no doubt assumed the owl was going to savage his face. Why Harry/Wizard, why would I do a thing like that? After all we have been through together, both in this world and in our last, why would I do something to punish you for leaving me behind? For leaving me in the Skywall room with the big head and the metal man that I cannot communicate with, Harry winced. All right, point taken. Sorry, Hedwig. Hedwig snuffled softly before going back to his hair just as Harry turned onto the block where the youth center was located. When Harry finally got inside the building and away from the confused and watching eyes of the street-walking pedestrians, it took him several moments to realize that he was now in an enclosed area with several people who could stare at him for longer as they weren't trying to go anywhere. Of course this didn't occur to him until he walked up to Ernie to check in for his shift with Hedwig still perched on his shoulder. Harry? Ernie stammered, wide-eyed and staring at Harry's familiar. Why is there an owl on your shoulder? Oh, Harry froze for a moment. He couldn't exactly tell Ernie that the owl told him that she was going with him and cut off any protest he could make. Luckily enough, Ernie spoke again. No, better question. Why do you even have an owl? This, Harry felt he could answer with a partial truth. Well, I've had Hedwig here ever since my 11th birthday, a present from an old friend of my parents actually. She's very well behaved for any kind of a pet and seemed bound and determined to come with me today. I think she's been feeling a bit neglected with my recent schedule. Ernie shifted his gaze to stare into Harry's eyes, as if weighing his truthfulness before nodding cautiously. All right, I suppose she can stay then, but any messes she makes or trouble she causes is on your head, got it? Nodding, Harry responded immediately. Yes, sir. Thanks, Ernie. He felt it might be a bit odd for the owner of the youth center to have no large concerns about a potentially dangerous predatory bird hanging around the place, but he had long since learned not to think too hard on Ernie's eccentricities. Waving him off, Ernie turned back to the grill behind the counter. Harry lifted an arm and let Hedwig step onto it before giving her a slight boost into the air. Hedwig pumped her wings a few times for extra altitude, then landed on a rafter overhead and settled down to watch over Harry while he started his shift. With Hedwig out of most people's immediate line of sight, though a few who had seen Harry come in with her still came up and asked about her from time to time, the first hour of his shift passed by rather quickly. Shortly into the second hour, Harry noticed the other 6 rangers making their way into the youth center, Zach with an unusual slump to his shoulders. They cut through the mostly empty gym floor and up the few steps to the cafeteria-type area around the juice bar, waving to Harry as they passed him. After a few minutes, Ernie sent Harry on break, so he decided to check in with them. Barely noticing Hedwig gliding to his shoulder again, Harry made his way over to the table the Rangers had claimed and took the only remaining seat between Trini and Zach. "So, how are things going?" Zach just groaned and everyone shot him a sympathetic look. At Harry's questioning expression, Billy spoke up from Zach's other side. "Zach is experiencing a transient deficiency in self-esteem in regard to the dancing contest tomorrow." A few moments later, Trini leaned toward him and whispered her Billy essay translation. "Zach is having self-confidence issues." "What?" Harry asked incredulously. Even Hedwig appeared to be surprised. "Why? You're an awesome dancer, Zach." "It's just, I don't know, man." Zach mumbled, frowning. "I don't know if I can cut it." Hedwig shuffled slightly before hopping the short distance between Harry and Zach's shoulders and butted her head up against Zach's. The Black Ranger jumped at first before relaxing when he realized who and what it was and giving the owl a scratch in thanks. Harry," Kimberly said quietly, seated on Trini's other side between her and Tommy. "Why exactly is Hedwig here? I thought she was staying in the command center." Harry rolled his eyes, careful to keep them facing away from Hedwig so she wouldn't see. Hedwig decided that she didn't want to stay in the command center any longer. She's getting bored there and Zordon and Alpha can't really communicate with her well. Plus she feels like she has to always protect me and she can't do that from the command center unless I morph. Hedwig spun her head around to face Harry. "It is not just a feeling, Harry/Wizard, it is a fact. You always get into trouble when I am not around to save you. You even get into trouble when I am around to help you. You are entirely too prone to troubles for my liking." Luckily, Harry didn't have to comment on Hedwig's statement as Jason spoke up next. "Isn't this kinda dangerous though?" he asked, a skeptical look on his face. "I mean, as far as anyone knows, she's a regular owl, and those aren't exactly normal pets that would be welcomed by everyone. What if someone calls the police or something?" Harry just shrugged. "It's not like she really is a regular owl. She won't cause anyone undue harm and will most likely stay up in the rafters most of the time. She just wants to be nearby just in case. Overprotective and all that. And if someone with authority comes by, Zordon is working on getting me the proper paperwork to own and train an owl like Hedwig, and Ernie is alright with her being here as long as she doesn't cause trouble. If worst comes to worst, I can always magic my way through things to keep people from getting too suspicious." A frown immediately fell across Jason's face. "We don't use our powers against innocents." Harry sighed slightly. "And my magic has been with me long before I gained access to the power, so any rules that apply to the power don't necessarily apply to my magic. I won't do anything excessive, just a confundus charm to make them think I already showed them the proper licenses or something. But knowing Zordon and Alpha, that won't even be an issue since I'll probably have the proper paperwork long before they become necessary. There shouldn't be any trouble." Almost as if summoned by his words, trouble appeared in the form of Bulk and Skull. "Hey, nerds." "Yeah, nerds." Skull's high-pitched laughter grated on Harry's nerves as the two bullies approached the Rangers' table. "So Zach," Bulk said with a sneer, "are you ready for the dance competition tomorrow? 'Cause it doesn't matter how good you think you are, I'm gonna be blowing everyone else out of the water." "I doubt there's going to be a biggest splash off a high dive portion of a dancing contest, Bulk, but good positive thinking," Harry drawled, bringing Bulk's angry glare off of Zach and toward him, only to pause partway when he caught sight of Hedwig still perched on Zach's shoulder. "What's this? Some kind of stupid fake bird?" Bulk demanded as he moved around the table to stand behind Zach, who was forced to turn to face him. Hedwig's head turned as Zach moved, keeping her steely yellow gaze on Bulk. "Do you think this thing is going to bring you some kind of good luck? Or is it your dance partner?" As Skull once more started laughing at Bulk's questionable wit, the larger bully started reaching forward to grab Hedwig. Seeing him move, Harry decided to intervene. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Bulk." Bulk froze with his hands a mere foot from Hedwig while the owl just stared at him. "Oh yeah," he demanded. "And why's that?" In response, Harry just whistled and held up his left arm near Zach's shoulder. Hedwig hopped forward onto Harry's proffered arm as he brought it back to his chest. She leaned into him and let out noises of contentment, her eyes closing slowly even as she spun her head around nearly 180 degrees to still face the two teens. Bulk jerked himself back. "That thing is alive," he near shouted, bringing the attention of everyone else in the youth center to them, with the few who had seen the entire exchange quickly explaining it to others in hissing whispers. Harry rolled his eyes. "Yes, Bulk. She is both alive and a real snowy owl. Her name is Hedwig and I've had her since I was 11. She didn't seem to want to stay home today, so I brought her along. Bulk shook the fear off his face and sneered at Harry. I wonder what Ernie will have to say about your little pet chicken. Harry scoffed even as Hedwig stiffened at Bulk's insult. He had to mentally remind her that she wasn't supposed to be anything more than a regular animal who wouldn't understand the idiot's taunt, and so she couldn't respond as she wanted to. Why don't you go ask him yourself? I already cleared it with him. Do you think I'd be that stupid, Bulk? Really? Why don't you just leave us alone, Bulk? Maybe before you embarrass yourself more than you already have. Tommy said, standing from his seat slowly, a move Jason copied somewhat hesitantly. Seeing a situation he was more familiar with, that of apparently physical opposition as opposed to anything involving a bird of prey, Bulk straightened up and once more fixed his sights on Zack. No, I don't think I will. Before the stupid bird distracted me, I was coming over here to give little Zacky a taste of what he's in for tomorrow night. How about it, loser? Let's have a little dance-off right now. Zack faltered slightly until Jason smiled and chuckled a bit. Go ahead, man, maybe whooping Bulk at his own challenge will be just what you need to get your confidence back. Seeing the other Rangers all smiling and nodding at him, Zack finally agreed and the team was treated with an exposition of skill on Zack's part while Bulk merely attempted to copy what he had done. Very, very poorly. When Zack started off with a few quick steps and a spinning high kick from his hip-hop keto style, Bulk copied by jiggling himself around and barely getting his toes above waist level. When Zack did a few more dance moves followed by a 5-foot vertical jump and midair split, Bulk spun his arms a bit and hopped maybe 6 inches up and turned his toes outward. Finally, Zack started dancing once more, working his way back until he had enough room around him and jumping into the air with his arms out straight, completing 2 full spins before landing in a fighting crouch. This time, Bulk just backed up too far and when he jumped ended up knocking down Skull along with a bunch of foam columns that Ernie had planned to use for part of the decorations for the contest the next day. The Rangers all laughed and congratulated Zack on his win, but Zack just waved them off. No guys, he just tripped himself up just like I'm gonna do at the contest. With that, Zack walked off without another word, leaving the rest of the Rangers speechless in his wake. Finally, Harry spoke up again. Man, he really is having self-esteem problems. If I had half the moves he does I wouldn't have any worries at all. Jason seemed to catch on to Harry's words as he spoke up next. Speaking of your moves, Harry, I didn't see you in karate class this morning. Harry stiffened slightly before turning to face the Red Ranger across the table. Jason had a stern look on his face, almost as if he thought he could intimidate Harry with his look alone. Harry easily brushed it off before responding. Something else came up that I wanted to get taken care of. I needed a bit of a break anyway, Jason. Don't worry about it. Jason's face started turning as red as his suit. What do you mean you need a break? Is the whole thing some kind of game to you? This is serious business here, Harry. You have to learn to defend yourself properly. Closing his eyes briefly and counting from 10 in his mind, helped by a few soothing words from Hedwig, Harry restrained his anger before meeting Jason's gaze. I agree completely, Jason. It is serious business. And I also don't think this is a conversation that you would want to have in the middle of the youth center. The other Rangers were beginning to clue in on what was happening at their table right in front of them and were looking uneasy, but Jason thundered on with a scowl. I think this is as good of a place as any. Why don't you tell me what's on your mind, Harry? Though his words were at least passably pleasant, Jason's tone of voice showed that the Red Ranger's own temper was building. All right then, Harry mused before shifting Hedwig back to his shoulder. Why have you been holding me back and calling me out over nothing in class? Jason's scowl deepened. I don't know what you're talking about. Even Harry could tell that his response had been a little too quick. Fearing where this conversation would go now, Harry cast a wandless notice me not charm and silencing charm around their table, just in case. Come on Jason, don't play the fool here. Even I know that I'm performing the katas as well as or in some cases even better than some students who have been at this for months longer than I have. I know for a fact that several of the other students are wondering why you're treating me the way you are. You're constantly calling me up to the front of the class and nitpicking on the smallest of issues. And when I spend the time between classes fixing the issues with help from the others, you find something else to pick on. And as soon as there's nothing else you can think of to pick on, you go back to the first thing. I most certainly do not. Jason near shouted, half rising from his seat before Tommy placed a hand on his forearm to calm him down. The Green Ranger wore a serious expression on his face, but didn't look like he was going to step in and stop this argument in the making. He and the other Rangers knew that this was a long time in coming. Harry just sighed. Jason, in one of my first classes you hit on my poor footwork in the first kata you taught me. I fixed that within the next week and you moved on to my blocks and ready stance. Then, 2 weeks after that, you hit on my footwork again, though nobody could really identify what I had done wrong no matter who I asked for help, and that includes those sitting at this table. So if you aren't singling me out, why don't you tell me what's going on? Jason opened and closed his mouth a few times and glanced at the others at the table before finally finding his voice. He spoke in a slightly quieter tone now, though his eyes still held the same firmness. All right, I'll admit that I'm holding you to a bit of a higher standard because you're a ranger too, but I'm not picking on you. Everything I've pointed out has been a valid issue that you needed to fix. Harry nodded somewhat reluctantly. Fair enough, but that really doesn't explain why I'm still being instructed to focus on the first kata instead of moving on to the more advanced ones? Why am I still a white belt when others who have admitted that they know they aren't doing as well as I am have been promoted? Why are you trying so hard to keep me down if you're only trying to help me better myself and my fighting skills while in uniform? When Jason didn't respond, Harry soldiered on. Look Jason, you and I both know that you've had a problem with me almost from the beginning. I'm pretty sure I know what your issue is, but it doesn't matter much at this point. Fact is, your conduct is bordering on unprofessional. I've even overheard a few students who are thinking of dropping out of your class if it doesn't stop. If enough people leave, it could result in you getting investigated and losing your certifications as a karate instructor. When Harry paused, Jason just grit his teeth and said nothing. Sighing, Harry continued. Look, I don't want that to happen to you, but you have to realize what's going on. You're letting your personal feelings interfere with your teaching, and that's not good. I just decided I would remove myself from the equation and see how things went. Jason finally spoke again, though he met the eyes of everyone at the table but Harry as he did so. And you all agree with this? With what he's saying? That I'm going too far? The other rangers looked very uncomfortable with the situation, but Tommy eventually spoke. It's true, man. You aren't the only one here qualified to teach karate, and I've seen a few of your classes and talked to some of your students. You're a great teacher, but your professionalism when Harry is involved leaves something to be desired. Jason's face started going red again. So he's turned you all against me then? Harry growled lightly under his breath. This isn't a case of you against me, Jason. The only teams here are the Power Rangers and Earth against Rita and her forces. We are on the same side. I know you don't like me personally, but when I agreed to join your class it was in the interest of learning to better help our side against Rita. And I told you I wouldn't give you any special treatment. But you have been, Jason. Harry interrupted the Red Ranger's tirade, his green eyes blazing with his internal power as his temper rose nearer and nearer the surface. The only difference is that you haven't been doing it in a positive fashion. You've been passive-aggressively putting me down and singling me out since almost the first class I was in. Your determination to establish your demps over me in the class since you don't feel you can on the Ranger team took you outside the realm of what is acceptable in terms of how you treat your students. And it's starting to have an effect on others as they take notice of what's going on too. Kimberly sighed as she looked between the two arguing teens before placing a calming hand on Jason's arm. The Red Ranger turned his head sharply to face her only to calm slightly at the sympathetic look on her face. Jason, I've heard the rumors Harry is talking about too. A few kids were mentioning how some of your students are getting a little uncomfortable with the way you've been calling Harry out. With the way you haven't given him proper acknowledgement for his successes and the like. With his anger fading fast, Jason looked around at the rest of his friends. Kimberly and Tommy had already expressed their opinions, but when he saw the matching sad, sympathetic looks on Billy and Trini's faces, he just collapsed into himself as the reality of his situation and what he could lose finally sunk in. So what do you guys think we should do? Harry sighed, letting his own temper die down before speaking. I think I'm going to drop out of your classes, Jason. I don't want to cause any more trouble than I already have, and the easiest way to avoid that is to remove myself from that equation. Jason's head snapped back up. But how will you learn to defend yourself? Harry shook his head slowly, mindful of the owl still on his shoulder. I'll figure something out, but for now I think this is the best option. The two held each other's gaze for several seconds before Jason finally nodded, letting out a sigh of his own. You're right, I'm just sorry it got this far. I'll work on it. Harry smiled easily before glancing at the clock and seeing his break was a bit past over. Standing from the table and taking Hedwig back onto his arm, he nodded at each of the Rangers. No worries, Jason. We're teenagers after all, angst and emotional outbursts are what we do. With a small, rather forced-sounding chuckle, Jason nodded back to Harry as he sent Hedwig back into the rafters, cancelled his spells, and went back to work. The next hour passed fairly quickly for Harry. He was feeling a bit lighter about himself after clearing the air with Jason about the karate classes and let himself revel in his newfound freedom. He made a concerted effort to not let himself worry about how he was going to continue learning without Jason as a teacher, deciding such things could be researched later. He would just have to make do with what he already knew and his magic for now. Further musings on the subject were cut off when the very earth began to shake violently. It started with a tremendous crack of thunder that partially deafened him. Hedwig let out a screech as the noise disoriented her, nearly causing her to fall from her perch in the process. When the ground started shaking, most of the people in the youth center started panicking and running for the exits. While most people would seek out doorways and the like in an earthquake, in Angel Grove things were different. It hadn't taken the citizens long to recognize that what felt like an earthquake was much more likely to be the footsteps of a giant monster, and being indoors when the building could be collapsed on top of you by a giant hand or foot wasn't the best idea. As Ernie ran out from behind the counter with a shout of, "I hate it when this happens," Harry stumbled across the unstable ground to the cluster of other rangers, sans Zach, who was still off on his own. "Harry," Trini near shouted, gripping onto his right arm with both of hers in an attempt to stabilize herself. "Do you know what's going on? Can you sense anything?" Harry shook his head briefly before realizing that as much as everything else was shaking, it was probably difficult to recognize his gesture. "No, we can assume that Rita is causing it because of the thunderclap before the shaking if nothing else, but I can't sense anything specific." "Zordon," Jason called into his communicator, prompting Harry to glance around briefly and see that there was nobody else near enough to hear them, as most everyone had already left. "Something is going on in Angel Grove." "Yes, Jason, I know." Zordon's voice echoed back. "I am detecting unusual power surges from Rita's moon base. The energy is more massive than I have sensed in a long time. If she is doing what I fear, then the entire Earth is in grave danger." "All right, Zordon," Jason said quickly. "We have to find Zach, but as soon as we do, we'll come to the command center." "Hurry, Jason. We may not have much time. I shall attempt to locate Zachary myself, and I will contact you if I am successful." With that, Zordon closed the communication link and Jason looked back up at the others. "Come on guys," he said firmly. "Let's go find Zach." Nodding, Harry and the other rangers followed Jason toward the exit of the youth center, only to be stalled by a cry for help from a pair of children wearing karate gi and hiding under a table. "Tommy," one of them shouted upon catching sight of the rangers, particularly the green. "Tommy, what's going on?" Tommy cursed lightly under his breath before turning to the others. "I can't leave my students here, guys. You go on ahead, I'll catch up later." Jason nodded. "All right, Tommy. We'll see you later then." As Tommy ran back across the room to the two boys and the other rangers started on their way out of the building to try and locate Zach, Harry was struck with the thought that he hadn't known Tommy even had any students. It only took a few minutes to find a location private enough for Harry to cast a tracking charm to locate Zach. When they found him on the outskirts of the park around 10 minutes later, the shaking in the ground had either stopped or they had traveled far enough from the epicenter that they couldn't feel it anymore. Zach's lack of concern when they came upon him suggested the latter. "Zach!" Kimberly shouted, having taken the lead and spotted him first. "There you are. We've been looking for you." Zach still looked rather upset, but Jason picked up the thread of conversation. "Bad news, bud, Rita is up to something. Zordon said she's gathering power for something big." Trini continued. Nodding, Zach stood from the bench he had been sitting on. "So we're going to the command center?" With a nod of his own, Jason brought his communicator up. "Right. Let's go guys." Now that they were outside, Harry could more easily feel the massive power buildup that Zordon had mentioned. Just before they vanished in their uniquely colored columns of light, Harry couldn't help but feel a hint of dread. Just what was Rita planning now? Zordon wasted no time in speaking once they arrived. "Welcome, Rangers. It is as I feared. Rita has finished gathering her power and cast a summoning spell to call forth one of her most deadly servants. Behold the viewing globe." As one, the 6 rangers turned to the globe as it lit up from within to show a zombie-like monster with bone-colored plates on its torso and arms as a sort of armor. The monster was a red, fleshy color and had 2 large bolts coming out from the sides of its head. This is the monster known as Mutatus. It is an undead warrior of great strength that has served Rita in many battles in the past and always brought her victory. If she is calling this monster forward now, it is because she is running out of options, but the worst is yet to come. Kimberly groaned. "I really don't want to know how something can be worse than that thing. Ugh, gross me out." Harry stifled a chuckle at Kimberly's comment, though not enough to keep Hedwig from hearing him from her perch on his shoulder and cuffing him lightly with her wing. "Be serious, Harry/Wizard." Harry gave Hedwig a quick scratch in apology as the image in the globe changed again, this time to show what was essentially a large, blue head with insanely spiky hair. Zach snorted briefly. Friend of yours, Zordon. Not wanting to raise Hedwig's ire again, Harry more successfully hid his amusement as Zordon responded. Unfortunately not, Zachary. This is the spirit warrior Loker. He is a former wielder of the power like Harry and myself who fell afoul of his own dark magics. As a result, he is trapped in a limbo dimension and only allowed escape when summoned by another. In this case, Rita called him forth to fight alongside Mutatus to destroy the Earth. So we've got a zombie and a super wizard. Sounds like another day in the life of the Power Rangers. Zach quipped, his good humor seemingly restored, though it also felt a bit forced, as if he was pushing his own problems and concerns aside for the sake of the mission. This will be your most difficult battle yet, Rangers. Fight hard, work together, and may the power protect you. We will, Zordon, Jason nodded, prompting the others to do so as well before everyone pulled out their morphers and Harry drew his wand. Alright guys, it's morphin' time. It took next to no time for things to get especially crazy after the Rangers morphed and teleported to Angel Grove proper. Upon materializing, they all noticed the giant form of Mutatus stomping around between the buildings of the city a few blocks away. Even worse, the monster immediately noticed them as well. So distracted were the Rangers by the proximity of the monster and the fact that it was already grown and was now approaching them, Harry was the only one who noticed the girl frozen in fright right in the monster's path and about to get stomped on. Harry! Where are you going? Trini yelled as Harry sprinted forward and away from the others, summoning his staff as he went and jabbing it in front of him. Accio! Harry near screamed, his magic reacting as expected and latching onto the now screaming girl, pulling her back mere moments before the giant monster's foot crashed down where she had been standing. The only problem was that the shockwave produced by the monster's step knocked the girl out of the fragile hold of Harry's spell and sent her sprawling to the blacktop. The girl's scream of fright abruptly cut off when she hit the ground, only to be replaced by cries of pain as she cradled one of her knees to her chest. Harry continued in his dead sprint, internally grateful at the increased stamina and speed granted by his morph. He noticed briefly that Mutatus had now spotted the girl, and Harry's approach as a result, and seemed as if it was preparing to stomp on the girl deliberately this time. Seeing that he wouldn't reach her in time at this rate, Harry spun his staff around him as he ran, gathering his power for a desperate move. When Mutatus's foot was a mere 10 feet over the injured civilian's body, Harry released a concentrated force wave. The burst of purple energy smashed into the bottom of the monster's foot and halted its momentum, if only barely. This brief pause gave Harry enough time to scoop up the girl and dash out from under the giant foot mere moments before it crashed down once again. Without pausing to think, Harry jumped into the air while holding the girl, twisting them in midair and vanishing with a sharp crack only to reappear back with the other Rangers who had yet to react in their shock. The girl's sobs began anew, though she now looked a bit queasy on top of her scraped and bloody right knee that she was still clutching. "Ha, a magi! Are you all right?" Billy asked, moving up to cast a wary eye over the injured girl and the Magi Ranger. "Yeah, that was a close one, dude." Zach followed up as Trini knelt down next to the girl when Harry moved to set her on the blacktop. When the girl refused to remove her arm from around his neck, Harry was forced to stay crouched next to her while Trini gave her a quick once-over. "Her knee is pretty badly scraped, but it doesn't look too serious," Trini said moments later. "You should be able to fix her up fairly quickly if I remember what you told us about your magic, right?" Before Harry could use said magic, Jason interrupted them. "We don't have a lot of time now. Magi, you take the girl somewhere safe and then come back to help us. We'll summon the Zords and try to take this guy down." Harry glanced down the road to see Mutatus was still standing where he had been before Harry operated away, glaring at them with his hideous visage. "I don't know, Red," Harry said after a moment, only momentarily pausing to keep himself from using the Ranger's actual name. "This doesn't feel right. He's just standing there." Jason nodded while the others shifted their gazes up toward the monster. "I know. It has to be a trap, but we don't have much choice but to meet him on even ground, even if we are playing right into Rita's hands. Just hurry up and get back to us as soon as you can." Harry nodded. "Right, I'll get her away from here and fixed up before I start back. Hopefully it won't take too long." "Alright, let's do it, guys." Jason glanced at each of the other 4 core Rangers before nodding as they moved to stand in line with him, with only brief hesitation on Trini's part before she stood after patting the somewhat calmer girl on the shoulder reassuringly. "We need Dinozord power, now." Mere moments later, as the 5 color-coded robot dinosaurs made their appearances, the 5 Rangers leapt into the air and landed atop their Zords. Shaking himself slightly, Harry once more stood, lifting the girl as he did so. "Alright little missy, let's get ourselves out of here before the Megazord starts in on our big ugly friend over there, yeah?" The girl squeaked slightly, as if surprised at being addressed directly, before nodding and tightening her grip around Harry's neck with her left arm while her right stayed wrapped around her injured leg. It was a bit of a difficult position to carry someone in, seeing as her weight was more than a bit uneven, but with the added strength from his suit, Harry was able to solid her on as he ducked into an alleyway and sprinted through, doing the best he could to avoid jostling her too much, and then down the next street over. As he ran, Harry idly studied the girl clinging to him so tightly. At first glance, Harry guessed her to be 12 or so. She was wearing a white dress of some kind with floral patterns stitched into it and had her shoulder-length hair swinging freely. At present, her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but he imagined that she was a rather cute kid when she hadn't just been crying after nearly getting turned into a pancake. Turning into another alleyway and cutting across to yet another street, Harry spotted a sort of garden plaza complete with a fountain surrounded by wooden benches in front of a building labeled as the Angel Grove Center for the Arts. Deciding that the relatively open garden area was as good a place as any to try and fix the girl up, Harry ran over to it and set her down on a bench. "Now, hold still. This may sting a bit, but you'll feel better afterwards, all right?" When the girl gave him a wide-eyed nod a few moments later, Harry waved his staff over her injured leg, casting both a cleaning charm to remove the dirt and whatnot from the injury and a minor healing charm. In a few seconds, the girl's knee was fully healed and she was staring up at him in wonder. Harry shuffled uneasily. "There you go. Good as new." "Wow," the girl finally spoke breathily. "I can't believe I was actually saved by a Power Ranger. Are you the Purple Ranger? I know all the others go by their colors, but you have so many that nobody has been able to figure it out." The girl spoke very fast, reminding Harry idly of an 11-year-old Hermione back on the Hogwarts Express. He chuckled briefly before bowing slightly to the now excited child. "I am the Magi Ranger. I'm an ally of the Power Rangers who has joined in their battle against Rita's forces." "Magi Ranger? Does that mean magic? Is that how you fixed my leg? With magic?" The girl was getting visibly excited now, her former queasiness from the apparition either past or forgotten. "Were you a bad guy like the Green Ranger was? Did the other Power Rangers beat you up until you got good again? That's what my mommy said happened to the Green Ranger." Harry rolled his eyes behind his helmet as the girl's rapid-fire questions kept coming. She was sounding more and more like Hermione every moment. "Yes, I used magic to fix your leg. No, I wasn't a bad guy like Green was. I helped the other Rangers fight Green until we were able to break the spell Rita had on him. That was before I got my actual Ranger suit though." The girl's eyes somehow grew wider than they had before. "Are you the guy in the cloak that the fat idiot and the skinny idiot were talking about on the news?" When Harry simply stared at her, his mind processing her comment, the girl wilted slightly and drew in upon herself. "That's what Mommy and Daddy called them when they saw them on television." Harry broke his silence with a chuckle. It seemed that even complete strangers were able to figure out Bulk and Skull after a single interaction, even if it was only one way and over the television. "Yeah, that was me, and while what your parents said may be true, it's still not very nice to call people names. And it's not very smart to get so wrapped up in your fans that you don't pay attention to your surroundings." Maggling. Harry spun around, moving from a full crouch into a fighting stance with the Magi staff held defensively as he stood to face Golder and the group of a half-dozen super putties with him. Internally, Harry cursed himself. Golder was right about one thing: he had gotten a bit wrapped up in his conversation with the girl. All the same, he felt his Gryffindor courage and his saving people thing rising within him, all but demanding he step up and respond to the taunt. "What are you doing here, Golder?" Alright, so he was still working on the witty banter part of the superhero gig. In his defense, the other Rangers weren't too good at it either. Golder merely laughed. "Empress Rita noticed that you weren't with the other Rangers anymore and felt you may be a bit lonely, so she decided to send you someone to keep you company. And of course you felt that you couldn't possibly come alone, am I right?" Golder threw his head back and laughed harder still. "I shall enjoy this fight, Maggling. We have yet to truly cross weapons since you acquired your new power. I will greatly enjoy crushing your hopes, and your skull, personally." Harry glanced back over his shoulder where the girl was still on the bench, though now she had curled herself up to be as small as possible and was barely peeking around his side to catch a glimpse of the monster and putties before them. "Hey, kid. My name is Marie," the girl, Marie apparently, snapped before instantly covering her mouth with both hands and going pale. "Marie then," Harry continued as calmly as possible, still keeping most of his attention on the now slowly advancing putties and stationary Golder. "I'm going to have to fight these guys. When I charge in, I want you to run the other way and head inside the building behind us, all right? You should be safe there. I'll come and get you once I'm finished with these clowns." Marie nodded frantically, now reminding Harry of Dobby as her hair flopped around similar to how the elf's ears would. He was certainly reminiscing a lot today. All right, Mr. Magi Ranger, sir. Not waiting for his signal, the girl immediately jumped off the bench and started running, drawing the attention of a few of the putties. With a growl, Harry jabbed his staff toward the closest one. Reducto! The red bolt of magic lanced forth, smashing into the chest of the putty and causing a small explosion that sent it flying backwards with a sizable crater in its chest. Over here, numbskulls. Your fight is with me. Having successfully gotten the putty's attention, Harry drew up the power within him, letting it flow freely through his body. He knew that he wasn't a great fighter still, but with the help of the power, he should be able to at least handle a few putties. While the silver runes on his suit began to glow brighter in response to the power, the putties charged in, their overly large hands reaching out to grasp at him. Just as the first one got within striking distance, Harry moved, swiftly bringing his staff around and slamming it into the construct's side, just under its arm. When that putty went flying to the side in a shower of sparks, it left room for the next one to move in and catch Harry out of position with the large heavy ball it had shifted its right hand into. Harry felt the impact of the putty's weapon solidly in his right shoulder. He stumbled slightly, but the hit wasn't enough to completely knock him off balance. Instead, he jabbed the offending putty with the butt end of the Magi staff, catching it in the side of its knee and dropping it to the ground as its leg gave out. The next two putties came at him with their hands shifted into swords, forcing Harry to backpedal as they double-teamed him. This lasted long enough for the three putties he had already downed to get back to their feet, though the one with the cratered chest was noticeably slower to do so than the others. You see, Magling? Golder taunted. You can't even handle a few putty patrollers. How do you intend to stand up to me? Harry growled slightly before gathering his power with a quick spin of his staff. I'm only just getting started, Golder. You haven't seen the barest hint of what I can do. With a sharp cry, Harry moved his staff into the chest of the nearest putty, the resulting impact releasing the built-up magic in his weapon to blast apart that putty and knock the other 5 to the ground. Moving as quickly as he could, Harry drew more heavily on his connection to the grid, gathering more and more power into his weapon while the putties recovered and Golder stalked closer. You know, Golder began again. For someone trained by Zordon, you don't really show any of his better traits. I fought against him back before my Empress's imprisonment, you know. He was a mighty warrior and a mighty wizard. You are neither. Golder pointed at Harry as he snarled dramatically. Harry just rolled his eyes and continued gathering power. He was planning something more than a little over the top, but he really wasn't trained for fighting crowds just yet. He needed to even the odds a bit. It is truly a disappointment that the first true apprentice the old wizard takes in 10,000 years turns out to be as big of a waste of power as you are, Magling. The monster continued with a scoff as the broken-apart pieces of the putty Harry had blasted began reforming into 2 new putties. He certainly wouldn't have made the mistake of letting one of these super putties reform while he was showboating. Harry smiled under his helmet as he finally felt the gathered power reach the level he needed. And that's the difference between us, Golder. Zordon was all finesse and control back in the day. I don't have the training for that quite yet. But I do have a certain fondness for overkill from time to time that tends to come in rather handy. Now let's see how you stand up to this. With a furious cry, Harry moved his now glowing staff straight up, rather dramatically he felt, and released the gathered energy in the form of a bolt of purple-tinted lightning that shot straight up into the air for about 20 feet before arcing back down and splitting into 8 different bolts, one for each putty and Golder. Golder, seeing what was about to happen, managed to leap back out of the way, leaving the now 7 super putties behind to get struck by Harry's lightning spell, turning them to little more than ash by the time the energy was expended. Ha! Harry panted lightly, bringing his staff back down to his side and taking a fighting stance. Let's see them regenerate from that. Well played, Magling, Golder drawled as he started forward again, paying no mind to the putty ash swirling around his feet as he walked through it. It seems I'm always underestimating you, no matter how many times we meet. No matter. Perhaps it's even better this way. Now we will face each other one-on-one. With a roar of fury, Golder charged through the last dozen feet between them, swinging his sword diagonally downward at Harry, only for the ranger to block it with his upraised staff. Golder merely sneered though before almost negligently kicking Harry back and breaking their weapon lock by consequence. Harry went flying backward, crashing into and through the wooden bench Marie had been on earlier, and finally skidding to a halt a few feet from the edge of the fountain. Even as a Power Ranger you still cannot stand against me, Magling. Golder taunted as he made his way slowly toward Harry's downed form. Grunting, Harry pushed himself up from his prone position before standing slowly, leaning heavily on his staff. There's just one thing you're overlooking here, Golder. The monster paused for a moment before snarling. And what might that be, little ranger? Harry steadied himself before pointing his staff toward Golder. I always managed to beat you before I gained this fancy suit. The only difference between now and then is that I've gotten a little karate training. Be that as it may, my strong suit is still in my magic. Reducto. With Golder standing so close, he had little to no time to avoid Harry's sudden spell. Honed battle instincts managed to allow him to shift just enough to avoid getting hit in his torso, but the solid impact and follow-up rain of sparks from his shoulder still managed to twist him enough that he tripped over his own entwined legs, falling face down and facing away from Harry. The Magi Ranger acted quickly, leaping backwards in the same kind of dramatic jump that he had seen the other Rangers do so often, raining down destructive spells and grid-powered fireballs as he went. He hadn't though too far ahead though. Because this was really his first time doing a super jump like this, let alone going backwards, so when his feet met the ground again he wasn't fully prepared. The end result of this was that Harry stumbled to the ground and went rolling head over foot until he finally hit the front wall of the theater building. Harry groaned as he tried to rise, finding himself remarkably unsteady as he did so. It took him a few moments to realize that he wasn't all that unsteady personally, the ground was just shaking. From a position on his knees, Harry looked up toward the roofline of the buildings across from him and caught sight of the massive forms of Mutatus and the Megazord locked in a grapple as they stumbled around, causing a minor earthquake with each heavy footfall. Cursing slightly, Harry forced himself back to his feet, still disoriented enough from his tumble to have to rest most of his weight on the Magi's staff as he stood. Upon reaching his feet, Harry looked up in time to see Golder once more charging toward him with his sword held in front. Maggling. The intimidation factor Golder held was only slightly tarnished by the scorch marks dotting his armor from Harry's spells, not to mention the darker patch of skin on the side of his blue face that showed some actual damage done despite the monster's full body armor. All the same, Harry found himself quite unable to defend himself as Golder approached. It turned out to be unnecessary, however, as Golder's charge was interrupted by both a fierce battle cry and a solid flying kick to the head. Aya. See Aya. Tommy's white-booted foot impacted solidly with Golder's face and easily knocked the monster to the side, sending his sword skidding along the ground with him as he rolled away while Tommy landed on the ground in a half-crouch before running to Harry's side. Harry! Tommy near shouted, placing a supporting hand on his shoulder. Are you all right? Zordon said you might need some help before we go back up the others. Harry nodded. Yeah, I'm good. Further comment was cut off by an unexpected source. Wow! Another Power Ranger. And it's the Green Ranger too. Hey, my mommy said the other Rangers beat you up so you'd be a good guy. Is that true? Marie leaned out from behind a concrete pillar, supporting an overhang on the front of the theater building a mere 10 feet away from the two confused Rangers. And he called you Harry? Is that your name, Magi Ranger? Is that your real name? Tommy turned back toward Harry, most likely with a guilty look on his face under the helmet, but Harry just waved his hand airily and stumble-walked over to the girl. Now that's supposed to be a secret, Marie, he said as he knelt next to her with a small grunt of pain. Then is the Green Ranger in trouble for saying it where I could hear? Harry shook his head, but any verbal response he would have made was once more cut off, this time by an angry roar from Golder. You may have beaten me this time, Power Rangers, the monster shouted while struggling to his feet with the help of his sword. But you will be unable to stand up to my MSTRS and her plans this time. Today marks the end of the Power Rangers, one way or the other. With his final taunt made, Golder waved his free arm around before bringing it horizontally across his chest and vanishing, presumably teleported back to the moon. Marie once more made a wide-eyed exclamation. Wow! I can't believe I got to see the Power Rangers beat a monster in person. And I know one of your names too. I can't wait to tell all my friends. Harry raised an eyebrow under his helmet before waving his free hand idly. Yeah, I'm gonna have to stop you right there. Somnus. Easily catching Marie before she fully collapsed, Harry settled her down on the ground before standing once more and touching the end of the Magi's staff to her forehead. With a mumbled spell and some harsh mental focus, he cast a memory charm and then a summoning charm to bring a small, decorative stone out of one of the nearby gardens. Tapping the stone with his staff, it glowed blue briefly, and he dropped it onto Marie's stomach, at which point she vanished with a soft pop of displaced air. Whoa, Tommy mumbled. What did you do? Harry turned back toward Tommy, still resting on his staff a bit, but glad his aches were already fading thanks to the power flowing through him. Sorry, Tommy. I forgot you haven't really seen me use much magic aside from combat stuff. I put her to sleep for a bit, then erased her memory of you saying my name and then made a portkey to send her to the youth center. I figure Ernie will be able to take care of her until she wakes up in about 10 minutes or so. That's kinda cool, man. Tommy smiled, a slight hint of awe in his voice. I never realized that your magic was so versatile. Tommy paused for a moment before speaking again. You may be having some troubles with your karate instruction, but with your magic you're still a definite asset in our fight. Harry sighed. Yeah, I just wish I'd remember that more often. I almost got my arse handed to me because I tried to fight Golder and those putties up close. Thanks for the save by the way. Tommy nodded. Happy to help, Harry. Happy to help. The relative silence, save for the now once more distant rumblings of the giant monster battle, was split by the six-tone chime of their communicators. Rangers, you must move quickly. The others will need the aid of the Dragonzord and Hedwig if they hope to stand a fighting chance against Mutatus. Shaking himself briefly and inwardly cursing, Harry brought his left arm up near his mouth. Right, Zordon. We're on our way. Glancing back up at Tommy as he lowered his arm, Harry nodded. You ready to go face off against Big and Ugly? Tommy nodded, clenching a fist and punching it into his other hand. Born ready. Let's do this. Harry nodded back before passing his staff into his left hand as the two rangers jogged out from under the overhang. While Tommy summoned the dragon dagger and began playing his summoning tune, Harry threw his right and into the air and released a pulse of power. Hedwig. High above the city of Angel Grove, Hedwig appeared in her full-sized Zord form in a flash of purple light, letting out a vicious screech as she began flapping her wings. I see the dead thing, Harry/Wizard, and it just knocked the big robot man down. Hedwig's words were punctuated by a massive, though brief, tremor that was most likely the Megazord hitting the ground. I am going to try to draw its attention away from the others. Harry nodded, idly noting that Tommy had just performed a super jump onto one of the nearby skyscrapers. All right, Hedwig, Harry said, trusting in their connection and the power to ensure she heard him. Just be careful. Hedwig's wordless affirmation was followed by another fierce screech before she folded her wings back and began a steep dive toward what Harry could only assume to be the monster's location. Thinking quickly and feeling rather against attempting another super jump anytime soon, Harry glanced around until he spotted a balcony high up on a nearby building and used a little line-of-sight apparition to reach it. After that it only took one more quick apparition to reach the roof of another building that allowed him an easy view of the oddly large clear area between large buildings that the Megazord and Mutatus were using as a battleground. Just as he jogged to the inside edge of the building, getting a clear view of the entire fight, Hedwig flared her wings out sharply, transferring the speed of her dive from vertical to horizontal as she raced through the air toward Mutatus while the monster towered over the downed Megazord. As Harry watched, the dome on Hedwig's head began glowing with power before a lance of bright yellow energy shot from the plate on the right side of her head and smashed into the unsuspecting Mutatus, sending the monster stumbling back with an accompanying shower of sparks. Hedwig fired her laser attack once more, this time knocking the monster to the ground, before she passed it, lashing out with her talons as she did and leaving a twin trail of sparks leaping up from the monster's torso. Immediately afterward, she began beating her wings to help the turbines in them restore some of her height to avoid crashing into any buildings. All right, Harry cheered from his perch. Nice move, Hedwig. Harry. Jason's voice came from Harry's communicator. Boy, are we glad to see you and Hedwig. Were you able to get the girl to safety? Any sign of Tommy? Jason's question was answered when Tommy's rally tune echoed across the area, followed immediately by the mechanical roar of the Dragonzord. The giant mech stomped into the area and used its tail to sweep Mutatus's legs out from under it again the instant it regained them, buying the Megazord enough time to stand once more. Harry still smiled as he lifted his communicator arm. I believe that answers your second question, Jason. And yeah, I got her to safety. Portkeyed her to the youth center a little bit ago. Awesome. Jason cheered, accompanied by relieved exclamations from the others heard in the background. Good work, Harry. Be careful with this guy though. He's a lot tougher than most of Rita's other monsters. You might want to have Hedwig stay a bit further back. She really can't take too many big hits without feeling it a lot more than our Zords. Maybe take shots when you see the chance, but try to leave most of the fighting to the Megazord and Dragonzord. Sounds good, Jason, you guys watch yourselves out there. Harry lowered his arm again and watched somewhat anxiously as the Zords engaged Mutatus again. With the monster now on its feet once more, Harry could see how the Rangers had had so much trouble with it so far. While Mutatus was at least a full head shorter than both the Megazord and the Dragonzord, it made up for this slightly smaller stature by being far and away more nimble than both. Anytime either machine attacked, be it a punch from the Megazord or a tail or claw swipe from the Dragonzord, Mutatus would almost negligently duck or spin away from the strike before moving back inside their guard and delivering a swift blow. Harry was momentarily startled by a scuffing sound next to him, but relaxed when he looked over to see Tommy standing from a crouch, having just leapt to Harry's building. Things don't look too good right now, do they? Harry shook his head as Tommy came to stand next to him, the two watching the battle before them solemnly. Not really, Megazord is too slow and Dragonzord is a bit too wild with its attacks. Mutatus is staying too close to the Megazord for Dragonzord to be able to properly engage it for fear of hitting the others. Tommy seemed deep in thought before nodding firmly. Well then, I guess we need to give the Dragonzord a little more help. Without another word, Tommy brought the dragon dagger up and played the rally tune. Immediately, the Dragonzord stepped back from the battle and stopped moving, much to Mutatus's confusion if its tilted head was any indication. With another nod, Tommy clenched his free hand into a fist. All right, it's time to do this the old-fashioned way. Without another word, Tommy leapt into the air toward the Dragonzord, covering at least 100 yards if not more, before landing atop his Zord and then dropping through some kind of hatch. Then his voice came from Harry's communicator. All right guys, Green Ranger checking in. Dragonzord and I are ready to take this guy down. Harry mused after the Dragonzord entered the battle once more, now moving more precisely than before. It looks like Tommy is controlling his Zord directly now instead of through his song's Hedwig. Do you have anything like that? I am unsure, Harry/Wizard. Though I do not believe there is any kind of trapdoor anywhere on me in this form. Harry shrugged before turning his attention back to the fight. Now that Tommy was controlling the Dragonzord, the tide of the battle was turning. With a little help from Hedwig, the now faster Dragonzord was able to prevent Mutatus from taking advantage of the slower Megazord as easily, and the Rangers had landed several strong hits in the process. Then the air was split by Rita's laughter. Believe this, power punks. Mutatus is nothing compared to the monster I have in store for you next. Beware the terror of Loker. What the? Harry tried to locate Rita, but her voice had emanated from everywhere at once. It was even possible that she was merely projecting her voice from her moon palace to try and distract them now that the Megazord and Dragonzord appeared to have the upper hand. Before any further musing could take place, the sky suddenly went black. It wasn't a gradual thing either. One moment it was a bright and sunny blue sky overhead with a few random clouds, and the next it was a starless night. Once more laughter echoed throughout the area, though this time it was much deeper in pitch and accompanied by a surge of the darkest example of the power Harry had felt in his time in this dimension. Mutatus seemed to relax even as bolts of lightning lanced through the sky, centered on a point over its head. The Rangers were confused though, their Zords looking this way and that as they tried to figure out what was going on. Hedwig too was confused, based on the mental feeling Harry got from her, but she was more concerned with avoiding the lightning bolts and so flew down to hover just behind the Megazord and Dragonzord. Mere moments later, the lightning coalesced into a gigantic blue head with incredibly spiky hair, the same one Zordon had shown them in the viewing globe earlier. The floating and vaguely phantasmal head was laughing maniacally as the Zords all recoiled slightly at its sudden appearance. Rita's laughter began anew, still echoing from everywhere. Prepare to meet your destiny, Rangers. Then her voice took on a strange cadence, one that reverberated with power. Oh great Loker, bend to my will. May your breath of doom make Mutatus more horrible still. Lightning once more split the sky, arcing around the floating head confirmed to be Loker before a wicked smirk stretched across its face. Yes, Summoner. They shall feel the power of Loker. While Harry watched on, all but paralyzed by the immense amount of dark power flowing from Loker, the head opened its mouth wide and released a gout of what looked like steam that washed over Mutatus, entirely hiding it from view. When the steam cleared off though, it was clear that the monster had gone through a drastic transformation. Where once it had looked like a zombie-type thing, now Mutatus looked more like a serpentine demon of some kind. It still had the same bone-like shoulder and arm plates, but now there was a sort of short cape coming from its shoulders. Its lower body remained much the same, but there was now a comparatively tiny representation of Loker's head mounted on its chest. And finally, its head was now on a long stalk-like neck that made it taller than the Zords it was squaring off against. While Loker and Rita laughed, Mutatus gave out a grumbling roar of challenge and charged toward the three clustered Zords. Hedwig quickly beat her wings once and fired up her rocket boosters, almost instantly shooting off into the air where Mutatus couldn't reach her, but that meant little as the monster merely charged bodily into the Megazord and knocked the machine back while barely recoiling itself. The difference in the battle became clear almost instantly. Whereas before, Mutatus had used its smaller size and greater speed to avoid the Rangers' attacks, now it was so powerful that it didn't even have to. Whatever Loker had done to the monster had made it strong enough to shake off even a direct strike from the Dragonzord's tail drill. SHT. Jason cursed over the communicator just as Mutatus landed another strong blow across the Megazord's chest. Nothing we do can faze this guy now. Harry, any ideas? Harry narrowed his eyes as his mind raced. I don't know, Jason. Whatever Loker did to Mutatis supercharged it with power. I don't think any spells I cast on it would hold for even a second before they were overwhelmed. Hedwig took that moment to make another stoop at Mutatis, carefully picking her trajectory to keep her from passing very close to the still laughing Loker. This time though, when Hedwig fired her laser blasts, Mutatis merely shrugged them off, and when she tried to rake him with her talons, Mutatis actually managed to grab hold of one of them. This caused Hedwig to begin flapping her wings frantically in an attempt to escape. It was not to be, however, as the monster's grip was too strong. After a few seconds, it began spinning in place while holding Hedwig out in front of it. Eventually Mutatis's momentum became too great for Hedwig to overcome and she was pulled into a level orbit around it. Finally, while Harry looked on helplessly, Mutatis released Hedwig, sending her flying through the air toward the Megazord and Dragonzord which had been standing by trying to find some way to help the other Zord. The end result of this was Hedwig crashing into the other two, knocking them all to the ground in a heap. Hedwig! Harry shouted, looking around frantically before apparating to a building closer to the pile of Zords. Hedwig, are you alright? It took a few moments for Hedwig to respond, and when she did, her mental voice sounded somewhat rattled. I believe I am mostly undamaged, Harry/Wizard. As are the other Rangers. I do not think I make a good projectile, Harry/Wizard. Hedwig's head spun around a few times as she tediously extricated herself from the pile of robots. Once she was off them, though not yet airborne, the other two were able to climb back to their feet somewhat unsteadily while Mutatis looked on, a somehow haughty look on its serpentine face. How are we going to beat this guy? Harry asked himself aloud, once more looking toward Mutatis, who was just watching them with its arms crossed. No matter what we've thrown at it, Mutatis just shakes it off and comes back twice as hard. We can't give up, you guys. Jason called through the communicator once the Megazord was fully up again, though decidedly worse for wear with the large number of scorch marks dotting its hull. Let's try the Dragonzord battle mode. Right. The others chorused as one. Their plan was interrupted, however, when Rita's laughter took on an even higher pitch before she began speaking again. Now you're finished, Rangers. Hit them, Mutatis. And I'll send them to the island. Mutatis unfolded its arms before flinging them forward and opening its mouth wide. From within its gaping maw came a spray of some kind of white foam that stuck fast to the Megazord and Dragonzord. Hedwig, seeing the attack coming and not liking her position on the ground, fired her rockets once more, launching herself into the air fast enough to avoid the foam attack, though the powerful burst left her too high for an immediately counterattack. The Megazord and Dragonzord almost immediately began showing a reaction to the foam as their movements became short and jerky, almost as if they couldn't move too well. What is this stuff? Tommy cried out, grunting as he tried to move the Dragonzord. It's some kind of highly adhesive mass. Billy responded quickly. It seems to be gluing our Zords in place. Hearing this, Harry began gathering his power before apparating to the closest building he could reach, this one placing the now frozen Zords between him and Mutatis and Loker. Moving as quickly as he could, Harry wove the power into a vanishing spell and let it loose upon the foam covering the two Zords. For an instant, the spell took hold and the stuff started to dissolve, and then Mutatis resumed the spray and Harry's spell was shattered. It's no use, guys. Harry panted into his communicator, slightly winded from the high-power spell. Mutatis replaces the stuff faster than I can get rid of it. And now? Rita's voice echoed once more, "Begone, Power Rangers." From atop Mutatis's head, where Harry could barely make out a tiny figure that had to be Rita, a bright red light grew. In mere moments, the light was blindingly bright, forcing Harry to look away just as Rita released her spell, sending a beam of magical energy toward the down Zords and the Rangers. Harry/Wizard, Hedwig's mental scream barely registered in Harry's mind, frozen as he was in the face of the massive spell bearing down upon them. Harry barely even noticed when Hedwig's massive mechanical talons closed around him, yanking him off the rooftop and into the air, leaving deep furrows behind where her claws had dug into the building. She managed to get out of the way just before the red beam washed over where he had been standing. When he finally came to himself again, Harry looked down upon the battlefield from where he and Hedwig were flying. He watched as the Megazord and Dragonzord, still frozen in place, tilted and finally fell to the ground. He looked toward Mutatis and swore he could feel Rita's steely glare as she watched the Magi Ranger and his Zord fly away, having avoided whatever plot she had set into motion to defeat the Rangers. "Guys," Harry called into this communicator, keeping his other arm wrapped tightly around Hedwig's gigantic talon. "Jason. Trini. Tommy. Zach. Anyone. This is Harry, come in." There was no response. 3 steps. Turn. Pacing in the command center wasn't nearly as good for letting off anxiety as Harry might have liked. There just wasn't enough room in the ring of consoles to really let out much steam. Worse still, the watching forms of Zordon, Alpha, and Hedwig were unable to help alleviate Harry's feelings of helplessness any more than his rapid pacing. After saving him from Rita's spell, Hedwig had taken Harry far enough away from Mutatus and Rita to avoid further attack. Once she returned to her smaller form, Harry then teleported the two back to the command center to try and figure out what had just happened. Upon arrival, Zordon had explained, rather briefly, that Rita had sent the other 6 rangers outside of his reach and there was nothing that could be done to help them from where they were now. From what he had seen in the viewing globe, Harry knew that Mutatus actually wasn't causing any further problems in the city. In fact, as soon as Rita had cast her spell, the monster went completely silent. It was still shifting as if breathing, but it wasn't destroying the Downzords or any more of the buildings in the city. It was all quite puzzling, but not anywhere near the top of Harry's mind at the moment. Suddenly, the Magi Ranger paused in the middle of his pacing with a frustrated grunt and spun to face Zordon. "Are you absolutely sure there's nothing you can do for the others?" Zordon sighed as he looked forlornly at his apprentice. "I'm sorry, Harry, but as I said before, Rita has trapped the other Rangers on her island of illusion in a parallel dimension where I cannot reach them. They must rely on each other and have confidence in themselves in order to escape. I know they are capable, but for the time being you will be on your own against Rita and her forces." "And how am I supposed to do that, Zordon?" Harry snapped, a swirl of wind kicking up briefly as his magic surged in response to his emotions. "How am I, a barely trained beginner of a Power Ranger, going to face off against a monster that the entire team couldn't beat? And that's not even bringing that Loker guy into the equation." The power I felt from him was immense. Zordon said nothing, merely staring back with an even look on his face. After a few moments, Harry sighed and forced himself to relax. "I'm sorry, Zordon," Harry mumbled before looking up to meet his mentor's eyes again. I don't know what to do here. It was bad enough back in my old world when I was thrown into the fight with little to no preparation against opponents many years my senior, but to be in a situation now that's so similar it's a bit nerve-wracking. But I shouldn't have snapped at you over it." Zordon nodded, a soft smile on his face. "Apology accepted, Harry. And I do understand your dilemma. As you said, you are indeed poorly prepared for a solo fight against Rita's forces. However, I do not believe that Loker will be as much of a threat as you fear. While he is indeed a dark wizard of incredible strength and skill, his nature and that of his entrapment works to our benefit. He can only take actions as directed by the one summoning him and as defined in the spell that is used to do so. Failure to carefully word the summoning ritual to call Loker to our dimension has cost the lives of many an untrained or ill-informed potential summoner. Loker is in the habit of twisting a summoner's words to get every bit of freedom he can and release his rage at the universe wherever he can, even if that means turning on his summoner at the first opportunity, which inevitably returns him to his prison upon their death. Rita is anything but ignorant of this and will likely have instructed Loker only to enhance the strength of Mutatus and then remain there until released back to his dimensional prison. It has been found unwise to task Loker with anything personally destructive in the past, as he tends to turn that back onto his summoners especially often. Zordon paused for a moment to let Harry process the information before continuing. "In any case, the fact remains that you are not alone in this fight. You have Alpha and I here to provide advice and support, and you have Hedwig to help you on the field of battle. If you work together, combine your powers as one, you will find that you are infinitely more powerful than you were separately." Harry felt a surge of power flare up within him briefly and eyed Zordon warily. Was that some sort of poorly veiled advice that will lead to some more of the dramatics that the grid loves so much, but will give me an edge in the fight? Zordon merely smiled, a few muffled chuckles escaping him, much to Harry's chagrin. Before Harry could further grill the floating head on the potential hidden meanings behind his last statement, the alarm in the command center began going off. "Aye aye 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 aye!" Alpha shouted, pointing behind Harry. "Look at the viewing globe." Harry spun in place only to find himself looking into Goldor's ever-hideous visage in the viewing globe. "Maggling," the monster simian grumbled. "I know you can hear me, Maggling." "What the?" Harry breathed before turning his head to glance at Zordon over his shoulder. "How did he manage to connect to the viewing globe? I thought it was entirely reliant on your own spells from within your time warp." Zordon's brow furrowed. "I am not entirely sure, but it is likely that Rita somehow caused the connection with her magic." Harry rolled his eyes, careful to turn back to the globe before doing so, as Goldor continued speaking. "You left so suddenly before, Maggling, that we weren't able to finish our fight." Harry snorted. "Yeah right, he ran off after Tommy decked him. But I think that you will come running to fight me again now." Goldor's face took on a sneer as the image began to pan out, showing he was standing in a large, open area mostly made of gray rock. Based on the vertical stone wall behind him, and the fact that Rita never seemed to do anything anywhere but around Angel Grove, Harry would bet it was one of the quarries outside of the city. "You see, I have a little friend of yours, Magdalene." Harry's heart dropped when he heard a familiar voice emit from the viewing globe. "Let me go, you big creep." The camera finally drew out far enough for Harry to see Marie, the little girl he had rescued just an hour before, with her upper arm held firmly in Golder's grasp as she struggled ineffectually. "Let me go," I said. "Magi Ranger will come and beat you up just like he did before. Just you wait and see." Golder rounded on Marie and drew his other arm back as if to strike her. "Silence, child. Or I shall end you myself before your precious Magi Ranger can arrive." Marie shrunk into herself, her fear shone through her face and the tears now running down her cheeks. Golder huffed before turning back to the camera. "As you can see, Magdalene, my patience with this child is running thin. If you don't come to the rock quarry where you first showed your power in the next 30 minutes, this child shall pay the price." The viewing globe went blank as Harry stared, wide-eyed with fury and concern for the child. Turning back to face Zordon, Harry barely kept himself from shouting. "I have to go, Zordon. I have to save her. I can't just let Golder kill her." "I know, Harry, and I agree completely." Zordon's calming voice had little effect on Harry's once more raging emotions as he fidgeted in place. "But we must not rush into this. Doing so will only put the girl, and yourself, in even greater danger." "Then what should we do, Zordon?" Harry barely restrained a huff as he began massaging his forehead with one hand to try and relieve some of the tension he was feeling while the other clenched into a fist at his side. "We can't wait too long or there's no telling what Golder will do to Marie." Zordon nodded solemnly. "Let us consider our options." As with most of the strangely numerous rock quarries and flatlands around Angel Grove, the one Marie was currently in was almost completely barren. Stone and gravel was piled up here and there, but there was no sign of the heavy machinery needed to move such large quantities of it, indicating to those who knew of such things that the quarry was not currently being mined. Marie herself, still in what she had earlier that day considered her lucky dress since she had been saved by a Power Ranger while wearing it, sat near the center of the area. Standing to either side of her, if the crouched and jerky stances they were in could be considered standing, were two putty patrollers. Golder, who was now standing a short distance away idly swinging his sword, had called down the duo of clay constructs after the first time the child had attempted to run away. He knew that they needed her as bait to draw in the Magi Ranger, but that didn't mean he was going to deal with keeping track of her personally. Growling to himself, Golder waved his free hand in the air, an ornate-looking hourglass appearing in a flash and floating before him, the sands almost all on the bottom. With a cruel smirk, Golder snatched the floating hourglass out of the air and moved closer to Marie once more, setting it on the ground before her shaking form with a thud. "It seems your hero isn't going to be showing up, little human." Marie sniffled a few times before shaking her head violently. "You're wrong," she shouted up at Golder defiantly, sniffing once more and wiping her nose with her forearm as she tried to fight back another bout of tears. "I know that the Magi Ranger will save me. He's a Power Ranger, and saving people and beating up bad guys is what Power Rangers do. My mommy said so." Golder threw back his head and laughed wickedly. "Oh, you think you know him so well, do you? Did you know that your dear Magi Ranger is a coward at heart? Why else wouldn't he have shown up before now? The 30-minute time limit I gave him is almost up and a true Power Ranger would have come here right away at the first sign of danger to anyone, especially a child." Marie continued to glare at him with all the power in her 12-year-old body. "Well, what do you know? You're just a big dummy." Golder growled again before swiping his sword at Marie, making her recoil as the blade passed a mere fraction of an inch from her face, and watched as a few severed hairs fell to the ground before her. "That was a warning, child." Golder grunted as he returned to a relaxed position, smirking at Marie's shocked and frightened face. "Next time I intend to cut a bit deeper than a few loose hairs." Marie just scrambled backwards across the ground and away from Golder as quickly as she could. She didn't make it far though as the two putties grabbed her upper arms and hefted her to her feet at a small motion from Golder. The monster in question, however, just picked up the hourglass once more, smiling as he watched the last few seconds' worth of sand drain away. Golder threw the hourglass aside where it shattered on the ground. "You see, he isn't here. The Magi Ranger is nothing more than a coward, and you shall pay the price for his cowardice." Golder began stalking forward to where the two putties were still holding Marie between them while the girl futilely tried to escape their stony grasp. "Farewell, human." Golder growled as he pulled his sword back to cleave the girl in two. Just as he was about to bring his weapon forward, a bolt of magical energy slammed into his back, wrenching the sword from his fist and sending it spinning through the air where it was caught rather nonchalantly by the purple-clad figure of the Magi Ranger. I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long, Golder. Traffic was terrible getting here, what with that big snake monster standing there and blocking up all the roads through downtown. Golder snarled as he spun around fully to face the ranger. Maggling. So you did show after all. I didn't think you had it in you after I beat you so soundly earlier today. Marie perked up instantly seeing the Magi Ranger beyond her captor. Magi Ranger. I knew you would show up. I just knew it. You see, you big dummy. I told you he'd be here and that he'd save me. Golder glanced back over his shoulder briefly before scoffing. You aren't saved just yet, child. As soon as I'm done with him, I'll be back for you. Ah, but I seem to have your sword here, Golder, the ranger continued. It seems to me that you have a surprisingly difficult time against me without your sword. Golder merely narrowed his eyes as he felt his anger rising. I don't need my blade to defeat the likes of you, Maggling. With a roar, Golder brought his right hand up to his eyes briefly before flinging it out to his side accompanied by twin lances of bright yellow energy that shot across the distance between the two in the blink of an eye. An explosion erupted around the Magi Ranger, hiding him from view and bringing a cry of fright from Marie as the shockwave washed over her. As the smoke cleared moments later, Golder growled in frustration when he caught sight of the Magi Ranger, still standing in the same place, but with a translucent purple barrier around him. Wow, Golder, I'm impressed, he mocked. That one nearly got me. Moving somewhat unsteadily, the Magi Ranger took a few steps forward, Golder's sword tightly clasped in his left hand. Now, Golder, release the girl, and I might not turn you into a frog when I'm through with you. Golder let out another roar as he charged toward the defiant ranger. Never. I will not be bested by the likes of you. Not now and not ever. The furious monster covered the distance in mere seconds, leaving the Magi Ranger only enough time to take a half step back, as if in shock, before the monster's fist was planted firmly into his chest with a loud clang. The ranger went flying backwards, dropping Golder's sword on the way, before hitting the ground and rolling head over feet for several more yards and sliding to a stop. Golder almost casually strolled toward his weapon before picking it up and twirling it in hand. And where are your confident words now, Maggling? The Magi Ranger was mumbling to himself as he slowly climbed back to his feet. Ai. Any further taunting from Golder was cut off by a victorious shout coming from behind him. Defindo. Marie gave off a short shriek of fright as each of the two putties holding her in place lost their heads. Quite literally as they fell from their necks just before their bodies collapsed, luckily releasing her before pulling her down with them. Then, mere moments later, the bodies simply ceased to exist. They're one moment and gone the next. Are you all right, Marie? Marie spun around quickly, her hair flying out as she did, and saw the Magi Ranger standing behind her, staff in hand and the silver runes on his suit blazing brightly. But you, she stuttered, turning again to see the other Magi Ranger back on his feet with a confused-looking Golder mimicking her as he looked back and forth between the two Rangers. How did? What's going on here? Golder roared, throwing his head in fury. Harry, from his position next to Marie, jumped slightly before crouching down and picking up a small stone. Marie, things are about to get kinda scary here, so I'm gonna send you somewhere safe, okay? Marie turned back to look at him before nodding slowly. Are you gonna make me spin around a bunch again? Harry chuckled as he tapped the stone with his staff, turning it into a portkey. Yeah, I know it's not the most comfortable way to travel, but a bit dizzy and nauseous is better than getting hurt by monkey as over there, right? Marie nodded quickly, a brief giggle escaping her lips. Monkey as, before Harry could give her the portkey, she turned to face Golder again. He called you a monkey as. She started pointing and jeering at the monster while sticking her tongue out between taunts. Monkey as, you are a monkey as. Groaning to himself, Harry quickly stuck the portkey stone to Marie's back with a quick sticking charm before activating it and sending her, once again, to the youth center. Well, Harry gave a sigh of satisfaction as he stood up again. Now that that's taken care of, good job Alpha, you can head on back now. Golder spun to face the first Magi Ranger again when he started to speak. Thank you, Harry. You don't have to tell me twice. Mid-sentence, that Magi Ranger's form began to waver before the illusion around him shattered, revealing the form and voice of Alpha 5. Activating teleportation sequence now. Without another word, Alpha vanished in a flash of light, teleporting himself back to the command center, his part in the rescue now completed. Now only having one target, Golder spun to face Harry once more and took a deep breath to calm himself. Very tricky, Maggling. I never thought you had it in you. Harry shifted into a fighting stance, holding his staff defensively as Golder began to approach him. As you've learned time after time already, I'm rather full of surprises, Golder. Golder smirked before stopping his approach around 10 feet away and taking a stance of his own. Yes, but is one of those surprises a sudden increase in your fighting skills? You know that you don't stand a chance against me, and once you're out of the way, my Empress will take over Angel Grove, and from there, the world. Harry smirked briefly under his helmet before speaking, doing his best to keep his voice steady. Is that why Mutidus is just standing in the middle of the city? Because Rita wants Angel Grove mostly intact? I was wondering about that. It should have leveled half the buildings by now, but it hasn't moved a bit. Golder scowled at what he had inadvertently revealed before shaking his head slightly. It doesn't matter, Magling. You will not live beyond today. We'll see, Harry replied mockingly, unable to fight the smirk now stretched across his face. Golder charged Harry at full speed, swinging his sword in an overhand strike that Harry blocked with surprising ease. As Golder began to press down with his sword, Harry shifted his grip on the Magi staff, angling it so that Golder's blade slid to the side, throwing the monster off balance and giving Harry an opening to spin his weapon around and land a solid blow to Golder's back, sending him to the ground in a shower of sparks. The monster growled as he climbed quickly back to his feet while Harry retook his stance before charging in again. This time, Harry parried Golder's move, almost nonchalantly sweeping the weapon to one side, before stepping the other way himself and tripping Golder up with the bottom of his staff. Spinning his weapon briefly, Harry fired a point-blank force wave, the purple spell smashing into the now prone Golder's back and driving him several inches into the ground in a Golder-shaped crater. It seems that I have the advantage this time, Golder. Harry mused, stepping back slightly while Golder slowly pulled himself free. Why don't you just run along back to the moon like a good little monkey, eh? Golder snarled angrily as he regained his feet. I don't know how you did that, Magling, but it won't happen again. Golder lunged forward, thrusting his sword out in front of him, but Harry merely rolled his eyes. Oh yeah, he mumbled. Because that tactic worked so well for you already. To Harry, it was as if Golder was moving in slow motion. With the power running through him at that moment, power that was being willingly donated by Zordon and transmitted to him, it was as if every single sense he had, every hint of awareness, was running at super speed. This was the plan Zordon, Alpha, and Harry had come up with to deal with the problem in Angel Grove. First, Alpha would teleport in and distract Golder while under an illusion to appear as the Magi Ranger. Once Golder was away from Marie, Harry himself teleported in and freed her. The super putties were an unexpected twist that they probably should have expected. Rita didn't seem as if she could do anything without sending down a horde of putties first, but Harry's quick and quite overpowered cutting and vanishing spells had taken care of them and prevented them from regenerating easily enough. Once Marie was out of the way, Alpha was to head back to the command center himself and monitor Zordon's condition. While the old wizard was sending Harry power to aid him in his fight, he was both vulnerable to attack and liable to drain himself so far that he would lose connection to the command center again. If that happened, it was entirely possible that he would die within his time warp prison before they could locate him again. While the time warp prevented him from aging, it also greatly slowed the rate at which he regained his strength, and so extreme exhaustion, such as that caused by overusing the power, could be fatal to him in much the same way untreated magical exhaustion worked in Harry's old world. This had all been explained to Harry in a very short time, and it had worried him greatly. The last thing he wanted to do was be responsible for the loss of the Power Rangers' mentor while they were trapped on the Island of Illusion. Jason didn't really need another reason to dislike him after all, especially after they had only just somewhat settled things between them, but Zordon had assured him that he would be fine. Right now though, with the incredible feeling of Zordon's power running through him, completely blocking off the comparatively tiny supply of his own power and magic, Harry was a bit too euphoric to worry about much of anything. He was not, however, too far gone to keep his mind on task. In the blink of an eye, Harry knocked Golder's sword aside again before whipping his staff around in a blur and jabbing the butt end into Golder's armored stomach. The monkey monster stopped dead, the magic-enhanced move delivered by Harry easily countering Golder's momentum without even affecting the Magi Ranger's stance. While Golder watched with a shocked expression, gasping furiously to regain his breath, Harry flipped his weapon again before wrapping Golder's wrist, forcing him to drop his sword. Smirking cheekily, Harry used the top of his staff to lift up Golder's chin before placing it up against his chest plate. Bye. Harry smiled cheekily under his helmet while waving with his free hand. Flipendo. The knockback jinx sent Golder hurtling backwards, flipping through the air uncontrollably as he was still too disoriented by the blow to his stomach to recover. Bombarda. Harry's exploding curse lanced from the top of his staff and chased down Golder just as his tumbling flight began. Too slow. The curse hit him and blasted him even further back, now smoking slightly and with numerous scorch marks on his face and armor. When the monster finally hit the ground, he was almost too injured to stand again, but when he did, it was to the sight of the Magi Ranger slowly pacing towards him, his brightly glowing staff spinning furiously as he gathered power. I don't understand, how did you get this strong? Golder demanded, one arm cradling his chest where it felt like he had a few broken ribs. I should be able to mop the floor with you. You're just a puny human. Harry smirked again as he continued spinning his staff. And there you go again, Golder, always underestimating me. With a grunt, Harry shifted his spinning weapon into a powerful move straight up into the air, changing the gathered power into an enormous bolt of lightning that arced up into the sky before striking back down a moment later and engulfing Golder in a blaze of magical energy. Golder's scream of pain was cut off mere moments into it with a pulse of dark power. Harry just sighed and let his spell die off, seeing no sign of Golder or what might be left of him, but knowing that Rita most likely pulled him back to the moon with her own power, saving him from destruction at the last moment. With yet another sigh, Harry released the tentative grasp he had on the power loaned to him by Zordon, the runes on his suit almost immediately returning to their normal, dull silver color as he slumped to a knee in sudden weakness. Moments later, his communicator went off. Harry. Come in, Harry. Sighing, Harry lifted his left arm up while his right clutched his staff, which was pretty much the only thing keeping him upright at the moment. Harry here. He grunted. Go ahead, Alpha. Oh, good. Alpha sounded slightly less panicky now that Harry had responded. You're still conscious. The sensors here detected Golder being teleported away, but we couldn't tell how you were dealing with the aftershocks of Zordon's power. Harry panted briefly as he felt his own power and magic returning to him, filling him with strength now that the greater well of Zordon's energy wasn't there. Yeah, I'm recovering, sure enough. Might need a minute though. I'm afraid you won't have much time for that, Harry. Zordon's voice came through, sounding a bit winded, but otherwise all right. While it is good that you didn't lose consciousness after releasing my power, you still have to deal with Mutatus. Harry groaned, stifling the complaints he wanted to voice as he forced himself back to his feet. And how am I supposed to do that, Zordon? You already said that even with your power I wouldn't be able to magic Mutatus away, and we both know that Hedwig just doesn't have that kind of strength on her own. If the Megazord and Dragonzord couldn't take it down together, how can Hedwig and I manage? Harry could hear the slightly humor in Zordon's voice. I have spoken with the grid, and it is time for the next aspect of your power to be revealed to you. Trust in yourself, Harry. Trust in yourself, in Hedwig, and in the power, and it will protect and guide you to victory. The wizard had to fight down another complaint. So basically I was right earlier about your advice and the dramatics and stuff? When Zordon didn't reply, Harry slumped slightly. Great. You will be fine, Harry. Zordon spoke again, pride overtaking his voice now. You have worked hard to get where you are now, both in your karate studies and with me in your studies of the grid and the power. While this is much earlier than either of us would have liked for you to be forced to fight without the other Rangers, I know that you are ready for the challenge ahead. Just as the other Rangers must rally their confidence in themselves and each other to escape the Island of Illusion, you too must believe in yourself if you are to win this next battle. Shaking off the last of the wariness in his body, Harry stretched briefly before nodding to himself and bringing the communicator back up. All right, Zordon. I can only do my best I suppose, but I promise you I won't give up. Harry could almost feel Zordon's nod before he spoke again. I know you won't let the other Rangers down, Harry. Now go, and may the power protect you. Nodding to himself, Harry brought his left hand down to his belt buckle and was almost immediately enveloped in a column of purple light that quickly arced into the sky and flew toward Angel Grove proper, taking Harry with it. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 8. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and 10-star 12 on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video, till then goodbye.